Welcome back to episode 97. Today's guest is, for a brief period, or was, my Kyokushin instructor, Laszlo Antal. Now, Laszlo came from then communist Hungary. Way back when was the former Austro-Hungarian Empire, but when he was there, it was Hungary, and it was part of the former USSR's communist regime, though they had a little bit more freedom, as he mentioned in his story. He came here to Canada when he was 18, and he came here with nothing. And again, in the podcast, he talks about his immigrant story, very much the classic immigrant story. Came here with nothing, and now he has something. He made something of himself. But he originally found Kyokushin in Hungary, and eventually continued his practice in Canada. And he is now a third Dan Kyokushin Black Belt and Sensei. Now, just to reiterate, Sensei Laszlo is here representing himself, and in no way, shape, or form is representing any official Kyokushin organization or in any capacity. This is just a conversation between me and him, and the opinions shared and his story are his alone and not that of any official organization. We talked about so many things, but the reason I had him come on was because another individual who's from a former communist country is very concerned about the direction that Western governments are taking right now. In particular, before the pandemic and now during the pandemic. Now, with regards to the conversations and how he's feeling, here's a little bit of clip.
Freedoms being stripped away. I think people, they need to ask more questions, being a little bit more engaged. You cannot function and live in a free society with these type of restrictions and creating this two-tier society. I think we are again at this at crossroads, and if we're not going to look at the big picture and start having meaningful conversations to break everything down, what's what, we are going to end up in a very dark place very soon.
So what do you think? You will find over and over and over again, people who left communist regimes will say very similar things, that they are exceptionally concerned about the direction of Western governments. Now, this podcast goes all over the place. But first, this podcast is brought to you by Urban Tactics Krav Maga, turning lambs into lions since 2013. You can train with us in person, www.urbantacticskm.com if you're in the Metro Vancouver area. We do not discriminate. That should be obvious. And if you're unable to train with us in person, we have a website called www.utkmu.com. It is a supplementary website. I don't hand out belts. It's mainly to supplement your current training with us or any other Krav Maga organization out there, or simply to expand your knowledge on how we present the information to our students. Currently, there is the white, yellow, and orange belt curriculum up. As I'm getting a expanded sort of small studio soon, martial arts, I will be able to film a lot more, hopefully, and expand this website further. But if you want to learn online or follow along with us, you can do so at www.utkmu.com. You can, of course, check out various topics of interest on www.utkmblog.com, various posts from myself, ideas, thoughts, and from now students. And if you would like to contribute a story or your experience or something about self-defense, you can submit to info@urbantacticscanada.com. We will not publish everything, but if we like what you're sending us and we do publish it, we will give you 3 months free at www.utkmu.com. You can also take your firearms licensing course with us if you're in the Metro Vancouver area. That, again, is on our regular website, www.urbantacticscam.com. Click on the CF Canadian Firearm Safety Course tab. It says CF Canadian Fire F Safety Course, SC. Yeah, I always screw that up. That tab, and you'll see our available dates. Limited space. Sign up early. Don't sign up last minute because spaces fill up. Also follow us on Instagram, Urban Tactics Krav Maga. and Urban Tactics Krav Maga on Facebook, and Urban Tactics KM on that cesspool that is Twitter, but some of you use it, so there is that. Okay, so we cover a whole bunch of stuff on this podcast. We start very much talking about martial arts, his experience in Kyokushin, discipline, self-defense, and then we branch off into his experience growing up in Hungary, communism, what's going on in the world. Eventually, inevitably, we find our way to the pandemic near the end of the podcast. Because there's so much in this podcast, I'm not going to go through and get the timestamps. I just don't have time for that right now on this particular podcast because it's such a deep, long conversation, and I don't have an assistant. So, but this I think is a good one of my favorite ones I've done in the last little while. No offense to the other guests, but just the depth and knowledge that we of Laszlo, and that we went into everything. And I'd like to say Laszlo continues to say, I'm not an educated person, as in he doesn't have a PhD, he doesn't have this, but you can hear how well read he is for someone who claims not to have an education. And I would really like to point out that this idea that being educated in the 21st century means it's a piece of paper. It's not. It's about knowledge. You can read, you can find primary sources on the internet, you can listen to interviews of people, you can listen to podcasts, you can do all sorts of stuff. Education is about knowledge and the application of it, not some Ivy League institution that gives you a piece of paper. So, I really do hope you enjoyed this episode. It's a long one, but it's totally worth it. Krav Maga is not just a self-defense system, it is a way of life. Warriors Den is a podcast for Kravists, fighters, martial artists, warriors, politicians, and general citizens. Consider this. The society that separates scholars from its warriors will have its thinking done by cowards and its fighting done by fools. Usididi. Your host, Jonathan Fader, talks to guests in an open and uncensored format about their fights, their philosophies, and their lives. No topic is taboo, and the conversation may start in one place and end in another. As the quote suggests, you cannot separate the warrior from the politics and the world around them, as a true warrior must be a student in all forms of art and science.
You're listening to The Warriors Day. Brought to you by Urban Tactics Krav Maga, turning lambs into lions.
Welcome back. I am here with one of the many martial arts instructors I've had over the years. For a brief time I did a form of karate, and I'm here with Sensei Laszlo Antal. How are you today?
Pretty good. It's good to be with you.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm super glad to have you on. This is going to be a fun podcast. We've had a pre-discussion, and I can tell this. You have a lot of things to say. So let's just start with the easy part. Is how did you get into the martial arts?
For sure. And before we get into that, I just want to say it was great reconnecting with you. And I remember those times when you joined our classes, and it was a lot of fun training with you. I also just want to set the parameters a little bit about our conversation tonight, and I'm not here to represent any organization, and this is just a friendly conversation between two friends. I got into martial arts when I was pretty young in elementary school, around 1984, and my first training was actually in the school. It was through my phys ed teacher. He was, I think, a yellow belt in Kyokushin karate, and it was sort of like a self-defense program, which I really enjoyed, and I really got into it. And so he introduced me to a club under the Kyokushin organization and under the Kyokushin umbrella. I almost immediately fell in love with the whole organization, the way it was structured, the way the all the coaches and the teachers were holding the classes and looking after their students. And then after that, it was just it became a lifestyle.
Yeah, that's actually a lot of people. the people who enjoy martial arts, regardless of the style, make it a lifestyle, versus those who are just doing it for a very specific purpose, usually fade away after a while.
And that's what happened with me too. It was I think another 5 friends from school, and within the first year I was the only one standing. And afterwards I was just so inspired by the multifaceted aspects of Kyokushin and karate, and for me it wasn't just the physical training, but I really started a journey of self-exploration and personal betterment. So since then I look at the world a little bit differently, and I tend to have a spiritual approach to most things in life, and that's what I was teaching to my students as well.
Yeah, that's we were discussing this the other day. It's a lot of people nowadays in the modern times are very turned off by the spiritual aspect of martial arts. Now, I teach Krav Maga, and people are often say, "Oh, I want to do Krav Maga because there's none of that stuff." But the way I run my club, there is some of that stuff, because if you're going to stick around, I want to make it a more holistic approach to things. And some people hate that. But what I often say, the pyramid of white belt to black belt, 10,000 white belts, one will become a black belt. And when you start to realize that's the norm in any martial arts, you're realizing, okay, I need to change what I'm teaching, because I'm specifically teaching self-defense with the Krav Maga perspective. So it's, what do I need to get people, if I'm assuming people are only here for 6 months or 3 months, what do I need to teach them that's going to be more useful than the techniques, versus something like karate? It takes a long time to really get your head around it. So what specifically, like in the style you practice, the spiritual aspect, like what elements of it are you specifically talking about?
And you hit that on the nail. When students join a martial arts club, and the parents will bring their kids to learn discipline and to get a little bit stronger and more healthy. I think that's a good start. And there are so many different styles, from one instructor to the next. I think with traditional martial arts, what is so beautiful is the spiritual aspect, and you have to realize that you can only compete and fight in tournaments while you're still able physically. And so a lot of young people, they're motivated by, let's say, testosterone, or they just want to get in there, and they're only looking for that aspect of athleticism and to prove themselves strong and manly. And later on, I also want to talk about the ladies, because that's also another very interesting topic, how martial arts are becoming very popular with women. But when I look at martial arts, I also want to start thinking about people and how to bring that circle complete. And as I start, as you said, a white belt, and then after so many days and years of training, you will be promoted and you will make it to a black belt, and I'm a third dan, third degree black belt now in Kyokushin. But by the time you get there, you also learn so much about yourself as a person, as a fellow karateka, where you are also building friendships and you work on camaraderie, and you're also giving back to the community as much as you can, whether it's opening your own club and start teaching kids and making a difference in the community and giving a place for people to come and do something useful and constructive. And sometimes, the general population, oftentimes they look at martial arts as something horrible or violent, and that could not be further from the truth. Martial arts are really, really amazing when also you look at the historical aspects of martial arts and how they developed, and the whole evolution of martial arts going back to India in the in the early days, in the 500s, and then later on how it spread to further in Asia, in Korea, China, Japan, etc., and then how also modern karate was introduced to the Europeans and then to the rest of the world. It was embraced by all cultures because it was more than just a sport. It was it has religious principles, and the way you're interacting with your teammates or your fellow karatekas and martial artists, it is just again an amazing way to make this world a better place. It forms a lot of friendships, and it's constructive, and it helps societies as a whole, and that's what I see in martial arts. When it comes to your comment regarding the modern martial arts, and it's sometimes being commercialized, and we look at television events, whether it's the UFC or some of these other mixed martial art events, and sometimes people, they go into that to make money, let's say. Again, I'm not here to judge, and I don't want to say the wrong thing, because I have great respect for anyone who puts in so much effort into their training, and also to improve their finances or to make money doing martial arts really, really well. And I would also like to think that all these great fighters, whether it was in boxing or UFC or professional wrestling, that many of these successful people who are more on the sport side and maybe not focusing too much on the spirituality side of things, that they're also giving back to the community one way or the other. And inspiring young people to get into martial arts, and then it will be up to those clubs and instructors.
Yeah, it's interesting, like the different, like I would say, because in modern times, for the sake of commercializations, a lot of styles, some styles of karate, taekwondo, or other styles, while they may have their origins in real life combat and whatnot, they've become more arts and less martial. And it's supposed to be both. Now, for me personally, you might disagree. I don't like doing katas. I don't find interested. I know for many people they're very spiritual and mental and that. I just not interested in that personally. And I can get into why. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Do you remember what I was saying?
Yeah, no worries. I totally get that.
Yeah.
And so I hated katas.
Yeah.
And I'm a pretty big guy, 6'2". My weight was always fluctuating, and sometimes I was pretty meaty and muscular. Right now I'm pretty lean and toned, and for me to get into fights and just kind of focus on sparring when I was younger, that was my biggest thing. And then later on, I started discovering the importance of good technique, and I realized that as I was fighting, that my techniques were really not all that clean, and the way I was throwing my punches and kicks, and the way I was positioning myself, or the way my opponent managed to get me off balance, it made me reevaluate my approach to training. I also had quite a few conversations, with my instructors, whether at first in Hungary, where I started, and by the way, that's where I was born and raised, in Hungary, Budapest, and then later on when I moved to Canada, I continued with some amazing people. Some of them are the best in the best, best of the best in the world when it comes to teaching and developing Kyokushin further and further. And so kata training became a new discovery for me. And it made me feel so good that I can finally move a little bit more gracefully. And again, for big guys like me, to be able to put those combinations together nicely in one fluid motion, and to also, when I teach it to my students, it makes it much easier, because it will showcase the beauty of that individual technique or a combination of many different techniques. And so that's why I think for instructors, it is very important to break those different aspects of training down and to look at the basics, the moving basics, and then the kata is right there with those moving basics. Those are the combinations, these formal exercises, and all these wonderful parts of training, which at first looks a little bit tedious and boring, will lead to something really awesome. When you start working on your fighting techniques and you start sparring, all of a sudden you feel more centered and you have a much better footwork and movement and the way you set up that punch or kick or that block. And it takes many years to get to that point, and some people will never get there, or even people who will finally get there, by then you're too old. You're full of arthritis, a few knee operations.
Yeah, I'm already there.
Yeah, there you go. Same here. So I think that's why we keep returning to the basics. And when you train in karate and you do high repetitions of punches and kicks, it is just to build up that muscle memory and to enjoy, and people will learn to enjoy that high repetition. People who don't and they want instant gratification, and again, I'm not here to judge, and I'm not trying to criticize different mindsets, because there are so many different ways to train, and whatever works for you, for other people and especially kids. The attention span can be very short with children. After 2 minutes, they're gone, and they're just going to do their own thing. So it's very important that you mix things up a little bit. You make it interesting, the way you speak, the way you inspire them, and so that's my take on focusing on all these elements of martial arts. You can't have one without the other. If you ignore one because it's not your favorite, it will come back to bite you later on. And right now, with the COVID lockdowns and me keep going back to the doctor with my knee, I moved out of Vancouver to Abbotsford. I had to close down my club, and I started training with another amazing instructor in Langley who just recently retired. And unfortunately, because of my work and because of my health issues right now, with my knees, I just can't take that on, and I had to take a little bit of break. I'm hoping to go back and start training and teaching maybe later on this year or early next year. But Kyokushin karate and martial arts in general, I think is just so colorful. I just can't get enough. And when I was watching you guys train Krav Maga, and it was I was getting ideas, and I think instructors too. They need to stay open-minded. They need to acknowledge that whether it's Taekwondo, whether it's Krav Maga, whether it's Jiu-Jitsu, They have their own merits, and you would never compare styles in a way that, which one is better. I hate that. I think they're all awesome in their own rights. They have their useful applications. They have their strengths and weaknesses. I think there are only maybe bad instructors, and your experience as a student will be such. And then you will reflect on that experience, and you're going to say, oh yeah, a few years ago I did whatever, and it was horrible, or it was awesome. But what makes it horrible or awesome is the instructor. And so that's my thought on that.
So now I remember what I was saying regarding the kata, because it very much sounds like for you the katas were a way to improve your combat skills, which that's what I was sort of insinuating, that you were combining both the martial and the arts. But let's say some forms of martial arts nowadays are going so much arts where the people who don't like to fight and only want to do kata competitions, but you watch them compete when they do fight, and it's like that's not real fighting anymore. In certain styles, I won't drop names, but we all know what they are. And I've met people who are like, yeah, I can fight, I'm a black belt, and then it's like, how much of your training is actual contact? Oh, I don't like that, and they avoid it like the plague. And then it shows both in their teaching that they don't really understand real combat, and also that the way they're teaching is more arts. And martial, that's what MMA kind of did, is it kind of blew a lot of that stuff out of the water. MMA, obviously at any given time, anyone can beat anyone when there's a set of rules. It could be fatigue, it could be mental, it could be whatever. That's why the best and the best will lose eventually. When it's life and death, however, things start to change a little bit, and all of a sudden that person with poor technique but the willingness to kill will come out on top. So I think it's if you're using katas for the purpose of enhancing your combat, I think that's what the original purpose was. But a lot of these styles, they're not doing that anymore. Sort of, you thoughts on that, or without getting too?
Yeah, no, I tend to agree, and one of the reasons why I prefer Kyokushin karate is because of that realistic contact.
Yeah. And
Kyokushin in the early days too was highly criticized
for being brutal.
For being brutal. And
just to cut in there, I can say I got more bruises from training with you than I ever did with anything else.
Well, I had my good and bad days, and again, building friendships. I think that one of the best ways to form friendships and camaraderie is through that realistic contact. So when you and I were sparring, I always told you guys that you can go full power with me, with each other. Try to do full contact, but carefully, because we also want to go to work and go to school the next day, and obviously we don't want to go home with broken bones. But Kyokushin karate has great practical applications in the military, with the police departments around the world, and in Hungary, Shien Kalman Furko, who sadly just passed away, he was one of the biggest influencers, and he also taught and trained soldiers with Kyokushin karate. So the famous Hungarian paratroopers and his commando unit was trained all day, all night by Kyokushin karate. And so when you're talking about the realistic combat abilities of people, I 100% agree with you that students in all martial arts style should experience that. If later on they want to branch off a little bit and they want to specialize in one thing, versus the other, I respect that. And going back to the ladies now, and not to pick on ladies, because I'm so impressed. And my daughter, who trained in Kyokushin also for many years, ever since she was 4 years old. And she reached the Shodan level in 2016 after so many years. So she was born in 1994. She started training in '98, so it was quite a long journey. It is one of the hardest black belts to get in the world, if not the most difficult one. I think next to the Shaolin discipline, and it's quite a hard, long test. And she also entered full contact tournaments, quite a few, and she also won many local events and even the Canadian championship on the West Coast. So I couldn't be more proud of my daughter, and more and more women are getting into the full contact aspect of martial arts. But for the most part, I think it is also nice that the martial arts world is also accommodating to people who are maybe on the gentler side, and people who are drawn towards the technical side of martial arts, where the art is so captivating that they would very much like to enter kata tournaments, and for the rest of their lives they combine meditation with kata training, and they're still there training with everybody else in terms of doing their cardio and techniques and all the rest. But not everybody was built for fighting. You and I, we enjoy it because...
Well, I don't know if I enjoy it. It's just what I ended up doing.
I get that comment too often, that some people, they did not enjoy fighting with me. And I'm like that too. Some of my training partners before too, I find them to be awkward or we did not really click, and fighting some people feels a little bit awkward. Sometimes, if they're much better than you and they end up kind of beating you up. For some people that's discouraging, and they don't want to do that anymore. And some people, that's why they go over to maybe kata, or their training interest will also will be a little bit different from that point on. But then again, some people will be motivated to work even harder. And in karate we have a lot of maxims and philosophical thoughts that we like to practice, and we have this one word, os, which means really that we'll persevere under pressure. That yes, we understand what this is, and we're going to live in that moment, in that bubble, where we're going to put 100% focus into that one true act, and that's kind of like a segue into other samurai philosophies or maxims, where samurais, before they went to battle too, they had to really focus on how they are going to win the fight. And their life philosophy was that every technique needs to be perfect. You can't just throw techniques willy-nilly, and you see that in fights so often, and that's why I love kendo. Kendo is one of the most amazing martial arts out there, because it's about precision, 100% dedication, living in that moment. And the samurais always said, one stroke, one life. So, and in Kyokushin, we translated that into a phrase that says Ichigeki Hisatsu, which means one punch kill. And so that's why we have knockdown tournaments. It's not a point system, although we do give half a point and a full point for effective techniques that will bring up an opponent down for less than 3 seconds. That's half a point. And if it's more than 3 seconds and the person won't be able to continue after 3 seconds, that's a full point, and that constitutes a knockdown. But again, it's no gloves, no protectors for the open division. For children, obviously, we introduced protective gear, and we want to keep them safe, and we want to ease them into that full contact gradually and safely. But yeah, so that's my take on full contact versus other ways of looking at martial arts. And the older I get, the more understanding I get. When I also looking at older people who would still very much like to keep practicing martial arts and they want to stay in it until their 80s or as long as they live, and also make a difference by coming to the dojo, inspiring young people, teaching them, helping them. And obviously at the age of 80 or 90, you won't be able to go in there and start sparring, right? Yeah. So that journey, that personal journey that everybody will take, there will be certain highlights and there will be certain things that people will be focusing on more, and you never know if you stick with the student with that certain attitude. Someone who really does not want to enter tournaments, they are too shy, they're too scared, they're very timid, that's their base nature. And if you keep encouraging them, to just keep on coming to training and slowly they will have small successes, with certain things. You never know, they might surprise you next year.
Yeah, and it's so that approach, like modern day people's relationship with death is very, very removed, and a lot of, probably because of Hollywood's, people's views on life or death combat are very incorrect. So like what you were saying about that knockdown, because let's say I knock you to the ground in a combat field, you're probably dead because you're either getting a boot to the face or a sword or knife on the ground. And so that sort of training methodology is more conducive to life or death combat than it is sports fighting, because in a life or death combat, I only need to stun you long enough to kill you, versus the sports combat, we have time to play and recover and go back and forth and show heart. For the samurai, kendo, the samurai basically, ninjutsu, judo, modern jiu-jitsu, all that. Karate, to some degree, again, you correct me if I'm wrong, comes from that. Although Okinawa, I'm not sure when Okinawa was part of Japan. You might know more than me that. But like, people often think incorrectly, like, oh, the samurai sword, they fight like the Europeans. It's like, no, that sword's not designed for that. And you actually see the recreation combat nowadays in like Russia or even Japan, where they put on the old armor and they draw the fake swords. You draw your katana. If you miss that first strike, it's the next, I forgot the names, the medium one. And then you're in the judo, then you're in the jiu-jitsu. And because of the armor, that's why wrist locks were so effective for the samurai, but less so effective in sort of when there's no armor. You have to either be really good at a wrist lock, or the person has to have no clue what's going on and be unaware. And that's created like a false idea of like even the Bushido code, which is a more modern invention. It's not in the old shogun days. They didn't really have that. There's that fantastic Netflix series on early Japan when they sort of unified Japan. It's a fantastic series, and it gives you, they're talking about one of these battles in 15 minutes with swords. They killed 2,000 people. And in order to do that, you have to be incredibly efficient in the way you're moving to run through that many people in 15 minutes. And I think modern day people, they just don't understand that the realization that when death is on the line, everything changed. Because like Krav Maga, for example, Krav Maga's have been having an issue in the last few years where they've been softening the training because they don't want to injure the soldiers, because say a special force soldiers is $1 million and that's taxpayer money out the window, so they keep softening it. They used to, like Kyokushin, do punches to the face with bare knuckles in the old days in the 70s in training. They don't do that anymore. Now they're fully padded up, but it has created incorrect technique. And what you started to see in the big Krav Maga organizations was, even the ones that are still doing proper self-defense, was that they're not developing the combat skills because people don't like that. And you're starting to see like people like me reintroduce sparring, and other people left the big organizations because it's like, no, you have to do sparring. You can do it safely. We do it safely, face mask, gloves, so that you can still make contact, make sure people aren't going crazy. And someone, I actually did a podcast with a guy named Ron Rotem. He's probably like top 10 guys in Israel that most people outside of Israel don't have a clue who he is. but he was saying Krav Maga got really good at self-defense, as in, I'm not expecting violence. Violence is suddenly upon me. That first 10 seconds, we got really good at that, but we've been failing to keep our combat skills up to date, like boxing, kickboxing, because a lot of Krav Maga people were finding, because they took it out so much, that when we go up against a boxer or a kickboxer, even in light sparring, they were getting picked apart. So you're starting to find that the good clubs are reintroducing that again, that, hey, you got to do contact sparring. So you're not delusional in your ability to defend yourself. An example, a story from one of my instructors. He was from Bulgaria. One of my earliest instructors, he was an Air Force pilot. So as a human goes, he's like the peak of human, intelligence in this, but he, ego, Eastern European versus here. He's teaching Krav Maga at like a YMCA or something. And someone was a jiu-jitsu guy. Now, the weakness up until recently of Krav Maga was grappling, because we say to stay off the ground, don't go to the ground. For the reason that's combat focused, you do not go to the ground. But as a result, people are getting so good at grappling nowadays on a more broad spectrum of people that if you don't know what you're doing, you're going to end up on the ground. So a guy said, and this is a common critique, for a standing rear naked choke. So if you're standing and someone gets up behind you and puts you in a rear naked choke, we have a defense for it. Now, when I teach it, I'm saying, listen, objectively, if someone got behind you who's malicious and skilled, it's too late already. This technique is for when they're not really serious and not going 100%, because if they are, you're in big trouble. Or if they're bigger than you, like you already screwed up, it's too late. The technique will probably fail anyway. So he's egotistical, and he said, some jiu-jitsu guy, I think it was a purple belt, it's like, oh, that's never going to work. So the guy basically got full-on jumped his back and choked him out. Because it's like the guy's being egotistical, the Krav Maga instructor. So the second time I said, you do that again. This time he's fully expecting what the guy's going to do. And he's a fast guy, so he blocked it, turned around, broke the guy's nose, and they got kicked out of the YMCA. But it's that you need to not underestimate what people can do, but understand you need to know the combat skills, but you also need to understand, do you actually have that versus the self-defense? And it's a complicated web that people to this day struggle to understand, because they want people to come in and train. Like if you watch some of the bigger organizations in Israel, they look like kickboxing classes to me, or like a watered down traditional martial arts, the way they have these kids sparring. And I think they've toned it down because they develop kids all the way up, so they've watered them down, versus the organizations that are more focused on military and special force. They're a little bit more hardcore. They usually don't rank either. But it changes, who am I teaching to? And then people lose touch of what their actual real goal is, which is I need to develop a person, no matter what their skill set is, to be able to both defend themselves and fight if they have to, because sometimes things turn into a fight whether you like it or not, if that makes sense.
No, perfectly. And I think if we look at our ever-changing, world, and in different times people were interpreting, martial arts differently. In the old days, in the times of the samurai, as you said, it was a life and death struggle and survival. Today, we live in safe spaces, and so that's where a lot of young people are seeing themselves, and which is I think a pity, and I don't know how much politics we want to cover tonight.
Much as you like.
Yeah, you know what, we have so much to discuss, and I think martial artists too, and everyone should engage in healthy conversations, and even at the risk of offending others, because that's the way we learn from each other. And you and I, we may disagree on certain things, but by keeping an open mind, we can also learn from each other, and we may realize that we were wrong on certain things. And I think the way we look at martial arts, or the way we set up our clubs, and you're right. Some clubs are, let's say, non-profit, and they do it out of pure passion, and they just want to live out the greatness to the highest possible level. of martial arts and the standards and maintain those very high standards. And that was one of the things that I always loved about Kyokushin, that most organizations around the world are still maintaining that. And again, I haven't traveled around the world from dojo to dojo to be able to speak to that, in a well-informed way. Unfortunately, when I came to Canada, I had to work and family and all that. So my training was really limited to Hungary and Canada. But in both of those places, my experience was awesome. And then sometimes, when going back to some other martial arts where it's becoming commercialized, and you're right, the old traditional form of those martial arts were really tough, but nowadays it's being softened up. And some of these clubs, they are going for volume of students and increased revenue, and that's their main motivation. And then the standards will be lowered, and then there goes that martial art. And I think it's terrible. And then hopefully there are also clubs where even if they are for profit, hopefully they can balance the two and they can still maintain a high standard. And I also know instructors like that, and more power to them. That's really amazing, because then you also need finances, you also need money to build a nice dojo, have proper equipment to be able to dedicate your whole life to the art, instead of most of us we work in a full-time job, or sometimes we work in 2 jobs. For the first 14 years when I came to Canada, I was working in 2 jobs, 7 days a week.
The immigrant story, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, the American dream, or the Canadian dream. No complaints though. I'm not playing the violin here. I'm very proud of my life, and I'm very grateful. But I can totally see how so many martial artists, like a friend of mine, Scott Boudreau, who really dedicated his whole life to jiu-jitsu now, and
he was world champ, purple, brown.
Exactly, yeah, like what a great guy, and he's humble, and he's got great humility, and the way he teaches people, he just pretty much very similar to you as well. And when I watch,
I'm more. I'm not as rigid and strict. I'm more screwing around and playing, because that's the Krav way, I think.
and you know what? And that's what I love about martial arts too, and the different style of instructing. I was always on the militant side, and some people, they really liked it, and some people found it a little bit intimidating. But once they got to know me, they knew that was just because I was so serious and focused on training. But I think you can't really label people or put them in boxes, because you really don't know them all too well, or people that you get to know, again, they might surprise you. And if the students are happy, and if their club is going well, and they keep furthering the greatness of martial arts, then more power to them. At the end, in our troubled world, I think this is just another useful tool that we have as a society, where we can channel our energy into something really good and positive. And I don't know, maybe we can take a break here, or you want to add to that, because I think we can really dig into the positive effects of martial arts in other areas of life.
I forgot who it was. Some I think it was a Krav Maga, or no, I think it was a self-defense expert that was talking about this. Is unfortunately the school systems have gone. They're a little delusional. It's run by idealists, and they took away a lot of boxing or wrestling, and now wrestling is still a huge thing in a lot of Midwest or rural places in the States, but in the cities, they took out the contact stuff a lot. I know, my dad tells me stories of it. He grew up in England, where if you were a bully, they'd say, "Oh, you think you're tough?" They'd put you in the ring with the school boxing champ. Now, either they kicked the crap out of the bully, or the bullies found a new outlet because they did well, or they beat the champ, and then all of a sudden it's "Oh, you're in the team now." And so it gave them an outlet. And so what this person was saying was that the school's approach to violence amongst young boys in particular of zero tolerance has backfired. Now, when I went to high school, they still had a zero tolerance policy. But for a while, we had a vice principal who I believe was Kyokushin Black Belt. I won't mention his name until later. Maybe you know him. But the student base, which had gangs in it, even here, respected that. And the fights at the school were lower because they knew if he showed up, he had no problem tossing a student. And he had on occasion when they got rough with him, justifiably so. The year after he left, we had this vice principal coming in, and he was from the private school system, and he didn't understand the violence that can happen at public schools. And we're in a safe city relatively to like the inner city in the U.S., and the vice principal got knocked out. Nobody respected him because he didn't understand it. Now, where this is coming from is because that first vice principal understood you got to let people fight a little bit, but then when it's too much, you get involved. And this is the self-defense person, I forgot who it was saying that by taking a full-on zero tolerance policy, you're not allowing young boys to understand what violence is and what is too much. You have to let them play, because in my day, or that vice principal, he'd get involved as soon as it's too much. But that way the kids would learn what the limits are. And what this the self-defense person was just talking about, as a result of having a complete zero tolerance and the inability to let young boys sort of fight it out a little bit, they don't learn what's too much. And so when then it goes right from getting kicked out of school because zero tolerance to the street, they go from zero to stab you now, because they don't have that in between to have some sort of understanding of what's too much. Because the people who understand violence and aren't totally just like shoot 'em up are often like, yeah, let's fight and we'll see who's what. And there's a scene in a movie called End of Watch where the cop, I think he's a Latino, and it's Jake Gyllenhaal's the other guy. I forgot the other guy's actor. They're up against some gangbanger guy, and the gangbanger or whatever is just like blah 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 cops and this and that. He's like, oh yeah, I'll fight you right now. The cop. And he's like, no, you arrest me. He's like, nope. Takes my belt off. It puts it down. This is totally off the record. And he's like, if I beat you, I arrest you with no questions asked. And the cop ends up beating him. And he's like, fine. And he's like, oh, making a big fuss. His friend's like, hey, bro, you agreed. You get arrested. And they respected the cop for that. And I've seen videos of this in real life, of this sort of thing happening. Now, the system and the public that doesn't understand violence frowns upon this. But sometimes that respect and understanding of sort of jockeying for position, which is evolutionary, is necessary. If you don't have that middle ground of, hey, let them fight it out a little bit, it's okay if they get bruised up, we can stitch it up later. We just need to stop severe injury. But the school system with all this, like, I am for compassion, not for empathy, because empathy is destructive in my opinion. Compassion is not. They're like, no, it's unacceptable. You need to use your words. And then these kids either go full on, as you said, like, I'll call them woke beta males. You might not use that word, but for the lack of better words, they don't understand that violence. And you'll see some of these people, when they start getting confrontational with people, they go right to piping people in the head. These people who will preach, use your words, like some of these Antifa dickheads who on the surface are preaching this, use your words and peace and love, and then you see them in confrontations and they just go on and take a pipe and smoke someone in the head because they don't understand that in between. So, I mean, I think that's kind of what you were alluding to some degree.
Well, yeah, and I think there's a lot to unpack there. Right. So when I was growing up, in communist Hungary, and I was born at, again, behind the Iron Curtain during the height of the Cold War, the school system was very militant again, and very structured and organized. And yet in our schools, we were fighting all the time. Like the boys, we were fighting. Sometimes even the girls would, tease you, or, during those popular moments, the way to express that they liked you was that they would kick you so hard that you could not walk for a day or something, but you could not punch a girl back. So, you would just kind of smile at them like a weirdo, and then you would go home, feeling really good that, oh, she kicked me, that means she likes me. and teachers were turning a blind eye to that, and I agree with you that from an evolutionary standpoint too, our genes are programmed that way. I mean, we are vicious beings, and the war and the struggle to survive is that fight or flight survival instinct is in all of us. And when you look at some of these social engineering projects, in Norway and Sweden, in so many other places, and now it's coming to Canada and the U.S. and to the free world. I don't even want to talk about Australia and what's happening there right now. It's just absolute craziness.
It's backfiring, I believe. But
yeah, let's hope. But when you're trying to feminize little boys as early as 4 years old, and trying to teach little girls that it's okay for you to walk up to that classmate, to that little boy, slap him in the face and just kind of tell him that I'm a girl, you can't hit me back. These type of grotesques, child psychology, teaching methods or curriculums, they need to stop. And when we look at our society today, and again, I don't know how much politics we want to talk.
Although the other one I recorded today was all politics, so this is actually quite tame compared.
All right,
to that.
Okay, good. I'm my goal with this podcast, and when I agreed to this gladly, was just to get people thinking that it is possible to have civil conversations, with the people around you about anything, and don't shy away from any topic. I think even if you don't know enough, and I'm the first one to say the more I read and the more I try to educate myself, the more I realize how much I don't know. And that's why I like to engage in conversations, and that's why I like to express my ideas and thoughts so that people can redirect me or they can build on it and they can show me other perspectives. But when it comes to our young people and the way the next generation is being brought up, and particularly here in the West, because I think in Eastern Europe until now, those traditions and those customs and those family values are still very much cherished and still being practiced. In the West, I find that we are now promoting something really dangerous, where we are getting away from family values. We are getting away from that wonderful Judeo-Christian value system. We are getting away from the nuclear family. Everything seems to be wrong. Everything seems to be incorrect and evil, and everything is being criticized about the West and Western culture. I think Western civilization is the most wonderful civilization ever built, and the way I see this is because if we go back, in history, and I think anthropologists came up with 350,000 year timeline for the human race. That's when the first Homo sapiens started appearing. We had constant struggles, and it's part of our mortal coil. It's part of our existence to suffer and to endure a lot of pain, and it is just such a pity that so many people are dismissing it, and educators are dismissing it. I mean, how in the world can you teach history in school by magnifying a small piece, a microscopic piece of one event in history, and draw a conclusion that, because of that one event, we're going to undo all this, and we're going to start from fresh.
Mm.
So I don't know what the next steps will be. Start burning books and destroy.
It's possible, yeah. It's the big warning will be if they start banning 1984 and books like that. Now, I think to contextualize it, just so it gives some people listening some ideas, because you mentioned you grew up before the fall of the Iron Curtain. I recently had one of my instructors, Petra on, who grew up in East Germany, in a similar situation. And when I talk to people who grew up in the former USSR, their recollection of communism is exceptionally different than what's being taught by people in North America about communism. They're talking about the ideals without the repercussions of it. So when you mention social engineering among the youth, anyone who knows their history, whether it be communist ideology or the Hitler Youth, for example, that's how you break the family unit, is by indoctrinating the youth. This is a known strategy that works to take over a society, regardless of whether fascist, communist. People get really silly about this. As a general rule, I'll use the word authoritarian. The other day on Facebook, I called the local government Nazis, and I meant it because anyone really paying attention who doesn't get that emotion, a lot of Jews got mad at me because how dare you throw those who were killed in the Holocaust? And my counter is, you can be a Nazi without having anything to do with the Holocaust, because there's modern day Nazis that have nothing to do with that. It's an ideology. Now, I could have said communist, the governments are communist, and they wouldn't have reacted the same. And I could always just point out, you do realize factually more people died under communist rule. And, oh wait, today, in this day and age, in North Korea and China, although China's more fascist and communist now, but North Korea, there are death camps in North Korea and China now. Death camps in North Korea 100%. China is not quite at that level, but with the Uyghurs, it's pretty close. That's what communism doing, but by using Nazi, it elicits much more emotional in a lot of people. So that's why I chose that word on purpose. They got mad, but whatever. People don't know their history. Now, to be fair, I try to play both sides. To be fair, history is written by the victors, and often, if you know who writes the history, it's the wealthy, it's the people they pay. It's in modern day times, it's the media. So there's always a bit of a skewed view of history because it is written by the victors. There is a difference, though, between learning a new fact about something 100 years ago because we discovered something new, and just adding that into the textbooks, which I'm all for because we learned something new, versus I'm going to completely, as you mentioned, destroy what we knew before. I mean, that's what Mao did. Killed everyone that was educated, anyone that questioned. And arguably, according to Dan Carlin, who's quite left-wing, who's a historian, that's what Genghis Khan did to the Muslim world. When you have to rebuild with the peasant class, you've basically completely undone thousands of years of history and culture, and it can take another 2,000 years to rebuild. So in our modern times, now that a lot more groups of people have freedom in the West, they're trying to assert their ideas and cultures, which is fine, but they're trying to do it at the expense of what was already established. Now, religion is an interesting one. I'm not a religious person. I don't need it in my life to be happy, and don't need it to avoid that existential crisis, but I understand why it has merits, because some people need that belief in an external thing because they know they can't control themselves. If there's nothing after life after death, you go full party mode and act like a total clown. There was actually this guy, Robert Breedlove. He's actually a cryptocurrency person, but he said the only working form of communism is the family unit. And I thought that was just like, I've never thought of it, but it's true, because that family unit is a small enough operational unit that you can guide and raise the next generation, but be functional. And that's something Western religion and culture brought, was the emphasis on that family unit. And regardless of your views on the Catholic Church or Islam or whatever, that family unit clearly produced the best result that any other culture has ever produced in the history that we know of. And people are trying to throw that out the window, but you look at cultures and communities where they don't have very strong family units, and crime is high, and behaviors are questionable. And you can say it's moral relativism, but clearly it's problematic for them and for other people. So it's obviously very important to have that family unit. And my wife, who's Chinese, never really thought much about the Chinese culture and how they push collectivism at the expense of the family unit. And then she starts telling me about how people actually behave in China as opposed to what they say they behave. And it's two different things. And how they actually behave is not as family unit oriented as they always say when you start looking into it. And you see kind of the chaos it creates when the state is controlling everything. And I think your concern and many people's concern is, what the results of communism is. You grew up with it, and what this destruction of the family unit can do, and people in North America and UK don't understand. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay, so yeah, what are your thoughts on the family unit and the growing up in communist and all that?
Again, there's a lot to say on that. When it comes to different degrees of communism or different political and economic systems, again, I'm no specialist and I'm no expert. I can only speak from personal experience. And I think in East Germany, life was much harder than in Hungary.
Mm-hmm.
It was one of the worst form of communism in East Germany, and I think one of the best forms of communism, if there's such a thing, it was maybe in Hungary.
Mm-hmm.
We did have bread, milk, toilet paper, eggs, and Hungary was still somewhat open to the West through Austria to get goods in. And so, but even then, the Hungarians could hardly wait for this to end. And so shortly after the Second World War, it took about 4 years for communism to take over and to slowly, abolish all kinds of, small businesses or get rid of the middle class and close down factories and everything now belonged to the state. Confiscated, farmers' lands, etc., etc. And then, a few years after, in 1956, we had a big revolution in Hungary, and a lot of people escaped Hungary. That's when my grandmother came to Canada, and with my uncle, who was maybe 6 years old at the time. So we had sort of the family got separated, and my mom, she stayed with her sister, and then the Russians came back in, and communism continued until 1989. I haven't been back to Hungary, since then. I left in 1988, shortly right after high school, and it was quite a journey for me to make it here. I don't want to get into that too much. It was quite an ordeal, and maybe I'll write a book about that one day. But family, interestingly enough, in Hungary remained very tight, and in spite of communism, and in spite of the efforts to indoctrinate the Hungarians, I think it failed, and the underground movement was almost on a it was like this telepathy, between people, that all you had to do is just look at someone, and it was like straight out of the book 1984. When people will look at you and they will try to figure out what you're thinking. People were still going to church. I am religious. I was born and raised a Christian and a Roman Catholic. And I was going to Bible studies during these communist years, and my church community was wonderful, and obviously the government would frown upon people practicing religion, but you can't really just wipe it out. We did not have a cultural revolution like in China, and luckily we did not have a Mao, and I think the Russians also kind of backed off after the 56 revolution, noticing some warning signs that maybe we don't want to impose communism that strictly. I don't know enough to comment on those inner workings of or what the mindset was for the Russian government when it came to Hungary after the revolution. But we were really blessed. I was blessed personally that my mom and dad they did really well under those conditions, and wherever I looked, all my friends and classmates they were growing up in stable, loving, good homes for the most part. And I think when you have such a deep root in the Judeo-Christian value system, and you don't have to be religious to buy into Western civilization. I think if you just simply look at the results and you look at the life that we live nowadays throughout the Western world, it is very inviting. It is very impressive. It is very positive. In spite of what the left is trying to say about Western civilization and how they are trying to tear it down and trying to paint this grim picture that it's an oppressive patriarchal society where the evil patriarchy is oppressing women, and we had our conquests and colonies and etc. Not really putting all that into a proper context. And so the going back to the family and why is it so important that we protect that family unit, and from a martial artist standpoint as well, I think when we are visualizing ourselves in daily life, and when we are looking for meaning and we are looking for purpose, family should be the number one motivator in my humble opinion, and I think that is the core foundation of any healthy society. And again, if we go back to that and look at the 350,000 years, if that would not have been important right from the get-go, we would not be here. So when we just kind of dismiss the family nowadays, and we want children to pledge allegiance to the state or to an ideology, or not to listen to their mom and dad and just go and protest and become an Antifa thug, wearing a bandana or a face mask and go and hit someone over the head with a pipe because I read a book and right now I'm an expert on the world. Here I am, I'm 18 years old. I attended this professor's class, for this semester. He told me communism is great. Socialism is awesome. The hell with capitalism and the free world, and we're all about tyranny and slavery and etc. So let's go out there and destroy it all. And so I am looking at this and I'm watching all these events unfolding, and it's like watching a sci-fi movie. It's like an out-of-body experience for me. It's truly a Twilight Zone. Like I just can't believe that these things are happening when we finally reach the best time in human history, and where we could somewhat relax and say, wow, we did it. And our ancestors did it. It wasn't even us. It was all those amazing generations who came before us. And you mentioned some great historical figures who went to war and they conquered and they also killed and looted and etc. But during that process, we also learned, and it was part of our evolution. It was the way we acquired, let's say, technology and invented technology, and Thomas Sowell, one of my heroes, he wrote this great book, Conquest and Cultures, that talks about this extensively. Sir Roger Scruton, who sadly passed away last year too, he wrote many books about the subject of human history and suffering, and he was a great English philosopher, and it just such a refreshing way to read their books or to listen to their presentations on YouTube. There are quite a few presentations from them where they can truly articulate what people like me, ordinary average people feel.
And I was actually only recently introduced to Thomas Sowell. I'm not very into classical literature or anything like that, but I heard him in an interview. He's like 90 now, I think. You hear the name Thomas Sowell, and if you present a lot of what he said into the general public who believes in that sort of left-wing stuff, they'll say, wow, what a Nazi. And then you tell them he's black. And you're like, forget the color of his skin. This man is a genius and a jewel of the American intellectual. And he understands what it means to be human so well. And I'm just like, man, I wish I knew about this guy. I don't want to sidetrack too much. In California right now, in 2021, there's a recall for the clearly corrupt Democratic idiot Gavin Newsom. The front runner to go up against him is Larry Elder. Well, Larry Elder is also black and conservative, and the LA Times ran a hit piece on him saying he's like a white supremacist wearing black clothing, and you're like, are you out of your minds? Like, I'm misquoting that title, but it's something along that line I heard today, and I'm like, these people are lunatics, like absolute lunatics, when they're attacking black intellectuals like that who don't agree with this ideology because it goes against their. It's like, this is insanity. I don't understand it.
And it's so funny how we can, identify the shortcomings and the flaws of the right, the far right, and that things can go really, really wrong. And Jordan Peterson, talks about that. Talks about this quite a bit. Another big hero of mine, just a great mind. And we are so lucky to have him. He's truly a national treasure in
Canadian
my opinion.
national treasure.
Canadian national treasure. Yeah. That's right. When you look at the left and how they proclaim that they are righteous and they're accepting and they preach tolerance and love and all that. It is so untrue. And it is quite the opposite. If you follow their party line and if you buy into that ideology, 100%, then great, you're one of them. But also just try to have a conversation with some of these people on the left, especially if you look at the media, the politicians, our school system, all these institutions were infiltrated by the left, and you can't even engage in a conversation with them. They won't even let you in. Heather McDonald, another great intellectual, she wrote this book, The Diversity Delusion. Another good book from her is The War on Cops. And she talks about how difficult it is to even go to a college or a university and have a healthy debate. With
that's why I laughed.
There you go. And so many students now, conservative students, they feel uneasy or uncomfortable being there, simply because because of that whole atmosphere and the environment that the left is creating. And so when you when you look at our core problems, I think that's where we need to start. We need to start talking again, and we need to take back the school system so that children will not be indoctrinated into any kind of ideology. I think we need to teach them academics. I think it will be up to the parents to teach them morality. I think, and that's why it's so important that we keep going back to the family. And parents, they need to mobilize. I think they need to get involved. They have no idea what's happening in the classrooms nowadays. And in
some cases in California, I believe, there was efforts of there was one school, they got in a lot of trouble, thankfully, rightfully so, that they were making efforts to list any parent who wanted information on the curriculum and on the list so that they could go after them and go after these parents. It backfired, thankfully. There was a recent case also in California, surprise, Sacramento, where there was an Antifa teacher teaching kids to be Antifa and giving bonus marks to go to Antifa rallies and support it. Now, Project Veritas got a hold of his video he posted, and my understanding is he's getting fired now because he was 100% indoctrinated.
I just read that today.
Yeah. And it's just like, when teachers start questioning or won't let you know what you're teaching their your children, and blocking you from getting involved, that's a problem. That's when you know we're going to indoctrination. Not why were you concerned about parents knowing what you're teaching the kids? That's like a red flag. Why do you care? What are you worried about if the parent finds out what you're teaching your kids? If you're teaching them something uncontroversial, then what's the problem? Because a controversy, to me, I was thinking about this today. A controversy is when the two sides can't meet in the middle, or one side is making a big a deal of something that it's not, and then it's a controversy. But if you're in the middle and everyone's like, okay, it's sort of down the road, no one's going to make a big deal. And so, a question would be, why did the education system in the West get hijacked? Now, I can't remember the names of the specific situation, but it was, I don't know, in the 60s, 70s, I believe in America, they caught about 600 USSR spies infiltrated areas of the U.S. Well, anyone that had successfully infiltrated government positions, they were arrested or charged or kicked out. But the majority of them were caught in academics, and the majority of them were not arrested. And the best I can figure is they just stayed there and kept doing it. And then when their handlers sort of disappeared, they're like, I don't know what to do. Well, I guess I'll just keep doing it. And it kind of got left unchecked. And I don't know if you follow anything Brett Weinstein has talked about with his stuff at Evergreen College. He was saying years ago, like, hey, this, because he got in trouble, Brett Weinstein. Now he's in trouble because he was promoting ivermectin publicly, and he got in trouble for that. But back then, he got in trouble because there was a anti-racist day where they wanted no whites to show up on the campus, and he said, hold on a second, that's racism. I am not endorsing this. And I'm probably screwing the story up, but he essentially ended up being chased off the campus by people looking for him to beat him up. He ended up winning a lawsuit where they failed to provide security for basically his job. They basically created the university allowed a hostile environment. I think he got some measly like $500,000 for him and his wife, who both taught there. And he's a progressive, or used to be a progressive. And he said, guys, this is going to explode into the culture. And everyone's like, no, you're crazy, Brett. You're crazy, Brett. This isn't going to happen. His brother, Eric, who's a little bit more like aggressive, was like, you need to talk about this, Brett. You need to talk about this. You need to bring this out. And Brett kept saying, listen, this is not going to just be a university thing, because everyone was saying these kids are going to leave the universities, get into the corporations, and then they'll learn the hard way. Except what's happened is the corporations are just accepting it instead of telling these kids to grow up and get rid of them. And Brett was like, I told you so.
Heather McDonald's The Diversity Delusion book, you're going to love it because it talks about that and that couple at the university. It is truly mind-boggling to me that we as a society, we let this happen. That when, in martial arts too, we are assisting and helping parents to provide a solid foundation for children in terms of developing their self-esteem and their personal worth, and to help them visualize who they are and how whole can they get, and would I at the end of my life, and I think going back to martial arts a little bit, and why I always kind of combine that lifestyle with also my upbringing, my personal experiences, and my Catholic faith is because I want to live a life that's worthwhile, and I think the biggest question that everybody will ask at the end of their life, at the end of their lives, is that what was it worth it? If I were to do it all over again, would I pretty much do it the same way? And if the answer is yes, that I'm pretty satisfied with all my faults, with all my failures, in the grand scheme of things, it was a life worth living. And that is the main question that everybody should remind themselves of, and I think if people would be just a little bit more grateful, and every day when they wake up, and if they look at themselves in a mirror, and they're pretty proud of that person that they are seeing, that's really good. And we usually find that more on the right, with conservatives, because we try to live out those values that were that were worked on, and values that evolved over thousands of years, and we respect that. We have a tremendous amount of respect for our forebearers, the previous generations who had to endure so much pain and suffering, that we honor them by making something really great of our lives. And so when we focus on family and how to put everything that we have into our children, the way we try to do right by our friends and colleagues, and hopefully you have a job that you also love doing, which turns into a career maybe. Those are wonderful things, and those people are tend to be happier, more upbeat, and they have this consistency in their lives, versus people who are complaining about everything, and people who are trying to shred all those different things because they are highly critical of how we got here, and that it was always a competition, between nations and between tribes, and we always belong to one tribe or the other, and for people to simply say that, okay, well, the white Europeans, let's say, they came out ahead of some of the other tribes or other countries around the world, but the reason why they got there is because they abused all those other countries and those other nations, and they colonized, and they went to war, and they enslaved other nations. And it is these type of claims, while they may have some merits in terms of events, but it is so narrow-minded. And for someone to simplify things to a point where the final result of their thinking is that, again, we need to destroy all this because it's all wrong, and it was built on blood, and it was built on thievery and all the rest. And then, as you said, they like to divide people, and because of the color of their skin or their ideology, and we as the human race, we have more similarities than differences. And if one would care to open a history book and just start reading, they will realize that very quickly.
Maybe.
Maybe. But and I think that's why we need to reclaim our school system, so that there will be teachers who will focus on academics, and they will start teaching kids history the way it should be taught. And I think it is extremely harmful when people are not having the right conversations. And you know, when you're talking about you know, the family is the only example of communism, I kind of have mixed feelings about that statement, because even within the family unit there's a hierarchy. And in communism the hierarchy is very narrow and very limited. Maybe in the family too, and I agree with you know, with the premise of that statement, but even within the family, you know, we need to recognize that we are all different. And mom and dad, they have their roles and their places, and then, you know, the big brother versus the little sister, you know, they are all unique and they're all special in their certain ways. And that individuality needs to be fostered within the family already. And you know, this other notion of you know, we need to create a society where we are all equal. Well, if we are not equal within the family in a very small scale, how in the world can we ever achieve that within a society with millions or hundreds of millions of people? And so again, it is just very scary for me, and I'm gravely concerned that if we're going to let the left wing ideology win and take over you know, our countries, our societies will fail. And I have no doubt about that at all. And so that's why, you know, as a martial artist too, we want to foster, you know, that individuality, and competition also is such where we motivate each other to do the very best that we can, and to be the best that we can be. And one of my favorite maxims also is, you know, winning is not everything, but making the effort to win is. And so nowadays, you know, in schools too, they're handing out trophies to the losers as well. So
they started that when I was a kid. Even as like a 5, 6, 7-year-old, I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. I didn't get into. I'm too resistant to that for whatever reason. But at that age, I'm like, this doesn't make sense. I don't want a participation ribbon. I know I'm not that good. That's why I lost, for whatever the reason, whether it's effort or whatever. It's like, that guy's better than me today. I don't want a participation ribbon. Right, but a lot of people are like, they start getting that dopamine. Oh, I got a ribbon. Where's my ribbon? I want a gold star.
Crazy.
Yeah.
And so I think in a healthy society, you need to have competition. You need to encourage children at a young age to join sports and to be active. They should not have any downtime whatsoever. The downtime should be, you know, sports. I mean, you know, when I was young, we didn't have computers and internet and video games. We were downstairs in the playground, and we were active, and we were playing, and we were doing stuff. And we were stuffing dirt into our mouths, and we did not have, you know, this germaphobe mentality that, wipe everything down and wash your hands, and it's like, oh my good Lord.
I just need to interject because there's a few things I'll forget otherwise.
Yeah, no worries.
So I think what Breedlove said about communism, I think what he meant, the family unit, is more that a family unit is about the largest unit you can have, where communism will work, whereas you have collective, if the family unit is healthy, I should clarify, it will be able to be collectively resources into something more. And actually where you do see this, at least here locally, is the Indian community, where they very much pool their family resources, multi-generational, and you see what they've been able to do financially while using capitalism. But it's I think that's where he's coming from. So conservatism for me, like I'm much more centrist than a lot of people think I am. It's just I think a lot of people here are left-wing, like really left-wing lunatics. And I don't apologize for saying that because you're not being rational. But to me, it's the observation that while change is the only thing that's for sure in life is change, death and change, basically, and taxes, right? You can't stop change. What you can manage is the speed at which the change happens. So to me, conservatism is moving at a pace that allows for change. And I'm not talking about like rigid traditionalism. I'm talking about like we need to conserve the wisdom of the past, but move forward as we gain knowledge. And so that slow pace, the slower pace versus what a lot of these ideologues on the left are doing is we need change now. We need it right now. And it's like, but you don't know the consequences of what you're going to do because there's no precedence. Or if there is precedence, we know how that went. No, I'm going to do it different. Are you sure? Because the reason why beyond that family unit communism will fail is human nature. Is everyone is ingrained to survive by maximizing resource intake. That happens in communism. It happens in capitalism. It's a human thing. It's regardless of the system that you have. So when you're destroying a functional system that can move forward and change, I think in Canada, based on various observations, that actually the largest voting bloc in the Conservatives are actually more libertarian leaning. You can see that by when Maxime Bernier was still in the Conservative Party and he ran for leader, in the first round of leadership voting, he had like 40% of the vote. The rest of the vote was split amongst like 15 other candidates. That should tell everyone that the idea that the Conservative is this ultra right-wing religious fanatic is how they keep portraying it. It's like, no, we're just people who like want to take our time before we decide how we want to take the next step in society. And I think one of the issues that's going on, I mentioned earlier, is empathy versus compassion. So I just had pulled it up because I'll forget otherwise. This book I read, it's called Against Empathy by Paul Bloom. Now, I've been railing against empathy personally for a long time. Because I'm like, some people said they think I'm a sociopath, so I don't understand stuff. And there might be some merit to that because I've had to learn how to deal with emotions. I don't necessarily feel them the way other people I think feel, but I always thought there was something. I basically have anger. It's my one thing. But Against Empathy basically lays out a scientifically based argument that empathy is destructive and compassion is useful. And the example in the book that stood out was they took a Buddhist monk. Well, so Buddhist monks are people who literally sit there practicing Zen and controlling their emotions. And people interchange empathy and compassion, but they don't understand they're not the same thing. So what they had this monk do is they put him in an fMRI so they could see his functional brain as it's doing. And they said, we want you to meditate and think about compassion. And he's like, after however long, they're like, how do you feel? He's like, I feel great. Like, it's awesome. It's great. I said, okay, we want you to think about empathy, doing the same thing. Now, two things. After he was empathy, they're like, how do you feel? He's like, I'm exhausted. And you can say, oh, this is subjective nonsense, except for the fact his brain waves changed, his imaging changed. They can actually measure in an fMRI compassion versus empathy. So empathy is where you're feeling what the other person is feeling. Compassion is understanding. So here's the issue with empathy, and it's destructive for this reason, is that if you're really, really upset and I'm feeling what you're feeling, I become upset. And my emotional state is now destabilized. And I am not also thinking rationally. And yes, I understand women are more empathetic than men. And there's a use for it with children. But what compassion says from a parenting is, listen, I understand this sucks right now, but I need you to do this for your own good. Now, I'm not talking in some abuse. I hate you for your own good in an abusive sense. I'm talking about, I have compassion. I understand what you're going through right now. I need you to sort of trust me on this. Like as a martial arts instructor too, it's more of compassion than empathy. Because if someone's having a really bad day and I'm a hyper empathetic person, some people are really sensitive to it, and that's fine. And I start feeling like that, then that wrecks the entire class because now I'm destabilized and I'm not looking at things objectively. So when you have the school systems pushing empathy over compassion, And I see martial artists who are trying to, like, people don't understand. They're just mimicking words they hear in the social circles. Oh, we need to be empathetic. And I'm like, no, we don't. We compassion. And I'm fair point to those who know me. I'm not very good at either of those things, but I fully admit, that's what it is. And through practice makes perfect. I'm learning to be somewhat more compassionate. But what that realizes is that a lot of people have this attitude, well, you should know. So people have this simultaneous idea. You should know better. It's like, well, no one taught me. Really, no one taught me. Well, you should figure it out. So people have that attitude. It's like, well, no, people need to be taught. That's where strong, like, male role models and female role models really come in. And a lot of people are missing one or the other or both in many cases. But the push for empathy is going to be a disaster, because then we become all emotionally illogical, screamy, yelly, ridiculous things that aren't being productive at all. Right? I think that's that for me.
And I don't have a degree in psychology, and I'm still learning. I read a very good book on emotional intelligence, and that was very interesting, and also reading the first two books from Jordan Peterson. I just bought his third. I look forward to reading that.
The second one?
The first one was the map of meaning, and then the second one was the 12 rules for life.
I'll just say that unfortunately, I think his issue with pharmaceuticals has impeded his ability to organize his thoughts, and this one is not as well argued and coherent. I think, unfortunately, I was like, oh man, those pharmaceuticals. I think they wiped him a bit too much.
I haven't watched those podcasts from him yet on pharmaceuticals. I'll look into it. And again, I don't even know where to start with with that one nowadays. I know it's causing so much division, and we need to have a good conversation on that, especially around vaccine passports and our freedom to choose, etc., etc. But going back to the emotional intelligence, I think within the family, I disagree with you on compassion versus empathy a little bit, because I think they kind of go hand in hand to me personally, and I think depending on the person, and you're right, what is their base disposition? If I have those genes where I can put myself in someone else's shoes and I can feel their pain and suffering, and that's how I approach a person with my compassion. I think those are two very powerful attributes or qualities a person can have. While as an adult with the right training, you can also channel that in a very helpful way. So as an instructor, dealing with your students, and you're right, one of your students will get hurt, and you have to deal with that, while you also have to pay attention to the rest of the class and finish that class and teach them to be tough and resilient and to persevere under pressure. I think those are good qualities for a teacher, also for a parent, for a companion, in any type of relationship. Some people score higher on with an emotional intelligence, and some people score much higher on your traditional IQ tests. I think both is needed to a relatively high level or at a certain level to be function well in society, and that's why for certain jobs you do have to pass at a certain level, because otherwise you're going to fail your group and your team, and you won't be able to deliver that type of service or live up to those promises or goals. But when it comes to going back to deal with also diversity in our society, and that comes very clear in the martial arts clubs already, and I know that when I see all those little kids with their different personalities, from different backgrounds, interacting and training. Again, I think it was already happening organically, and one of the things that I always liked about Canada and the Western world is because it was so accepting, and nowadays, it's being forced on people that we need to take time. Even within companies, there are these mandatory trainings. The sensitivity training, and learn about diversity and learn about the inherent bias that you may have, that you need to explore that and reflect, and etc. etc. I think we already did really, really well, and I agree with you that in a healthy society you need both conservatives and liberals, but liberalism in a classical sense. I think today's liberalism was completely hijacked, and it is now something else. Is this postmodernist types, looking at the world again, the old-fashioned way, which is just I think completely outdated. That you have the successful people who will make it in life, which is nowadays the middle class. They are oppressing the disenfranchised masses on the bottom, and I don't buy into that at all, because if there ever was a system that caters to everyone, including the disenfranchised masses on the bottom, we are helping them, and creating opportunities at the starting line to climb that ladder and to make this life again all that you want it to be. And if some people they lack the motivation or the resilience, again going back to competition, it's something that needs to be worked on. If it wasn't worked on early on in childhood during their development, and now in their 20s and 30s they're still living with mom and dad in the basement, and they really don't know what to do with themselves, or they ended up spending mom and dad's money on useless degrees in Marxism and this and that. I think it's never too late. They can still join the rest of society, and they can still go out there, and it costs, I think, $100 to go to City Hall and get yourself a business license.
Yeah, it's pretty cheap here.
Get yourself a lawnmower, you open your own landscape company, and 5 years later you can be a millionaire. I mean, sky is the limit. If I also hear a lot of talk about from the feminists that they still feel that men are oppressing them. What nonsense! If a woman wants to be in a leadership position, and if she's qualified, they can do it all. And if you see, and I think there were quite a few studies out there, and I think the numbers support how well women are doing in our world. If that's what they want, and if they want to have a professional career, whether it's being a lawyer, being a CEO of a company, being in high level positions, they are doing it, and often they make even more money than men. So I think that the best system we ever had was capitalism. And when you mentioned the Indian family, I mean, people from India, they understand capitalism quite well, because I think one of the ultimate forms of capitalism is being practiced in India. And so even within the family, I think they kind of marry those two, and within the family, respecting your elders and practicing good family values, and going out there and working hard and pulling your resources together. I think those are all positives, and I don't want to generalize, because maybe some families it doesn't work out quite that way, and maybe there are also some friction or disagreements, which I guess would be normal in all families. But that brings me to another point, is that the left is envisioning this heaven on earth utopian society where everybody will be equal and we're going to hold hands and sing Kumbaya. If you can't make that work within the family, even within a family of 4, and when the relatives will come over, at Thanksgiving or Christmas, and there goes a neighborhood, and there are the black sheeps in the family. In every family there's at least one, and there are the disagreements, and et cetera, et cetera. I mean, how in the world can you have, that type of a utopian system on a grand scale?
Yeah.
It's unrealistic. It's laughable. It is definitely not something that we should pursue. When it comes to these claims that again, men are oppressing women, or white. The number one, the public enemy is the white, heterosexual, conservative, Christian male, and we need to get rid of them, and we need to get rid of Europe as well, and we need to have the European Union, and we need to tear down the borders, and we need to replace the population through mass emigration from other cultures with opposing viewpoints and opposing ideologies, etc., etc. I mean, again, it is just so destructive what's happening right now, and again, in order to preserve and to protect that, I think we need to go back to the basics again. And just like in martial arts, when we feel a little bit lost, or we really don't feel that we're making progress in terms of our technique or moving forward, or how we're going to do things in life, I think we need to remind ourselves of all those wonderful basics, those foundations that we have, so that we can carefully and slowly build on that, and having the adventurous spirit of liberalism, where we do want to try new things, and we want to innovate, and we want to invent newer technologies, and we want to clean this planet, but we want to do it in a creative way, where we're not going to do it at the expense of the economy, or destroying the world's economy with ridiculous ideas like the Green New Deal, etc., etc. So I think we are at a tipping point right now, and the elections in Canada are coming up, and I'm curious to see how that will play out.
The polls are in our favors right now, but who knows?
I know, and politicians too nowadays, even within the Conservative Party, sometimes I'm a little bit worried that they're still part of the establishment, and very few of them will have the spine to stand up and speak out against horrible ideas, because they still want to cater to everybody, and that's not what
I'm not
politics
sure that's
is.
the case in Canada. Before I forget, because you mentioned something, this is actually a Jordan Peterson quote. And what I would say is you need to be able to do the micro before you can do the macro. Although there's a lot of intellectuals who keep saying, regardless of what you're talking about, prediction, a truly accurate prediction has to only be narrow in scope. You cannot predict broadly. It's too many variables. So Jordan Peterson's quote is, if you cannot bring peace to your household, how dare you try to rule a city, right? And so, some certain high-profile American politicians may or may not have crackhead sons running around doing all sorts of ridiculous crap, and then you can see how his leadership is doing well, versus the other bad individual, as the media would say. Actually, you look at his children, and they're doing really well. Even though they had dad's money, they're all behaved. They'll run successful businesses. They're good behaved people, if you know what I mean by that. So if you can't take care of yourself and your family first, or you run away from it, it means you haven't really developed yourself properly, and it'll be difficult to manage larger systems. Now, you said something that, I'm debating about myself, is the whole staying in your mom's basement thing. Now, I think that in itself is not a bad thing, because historically, up until the 50s or 60s, people very rarely left home. And, when you got married, you'd stay, an intergenerational thing. And due to economic reasons, people were able to easily go get any job, go buy a house, have their own house fairly quickly, from, 50s, 60s onwards, all the way up until fairly recently, actually. And actually look, the amount of people who were forced to live back with their parents, not from want, but from economic. It's going back to that economic, because our economic systems are not doing well right now, no matter what anyone says. So a lot of people are being forced to stay in intergenerational homes again, because it's much more difficult to own property. We had you mentioned earlier, we had a very nice, peaceful period, relatively, in Western world, from the the 50s, 60s towards probably late 90s, early 2000s, where you could get any decent job, work for 5 years, and you could probably get a mortgage on a house. And now, like me and my wife were looking for a house, it's impossible unless you have millions of dollars. Like, you're getting outbid by people, and it's crazy. And so we're like, oh, we'll get a townhouse. So there's always these multi-layer factors. Now, if you're staying in your mom's basement doing nothing, that's a problem.
And that's what I meant.
Yeah.
And when I was growing up in Hungary too, it was usually 3 generations living in a small, tiny apartment with 2 rooms. Not 2 bedrooms, but 2 rooms. And then at night you would convert those rooms into bedrooms. In the morning you would turn it back into a living space. There was these ghetto-style apartment buildings, quite ugly. But what I lived, it was actually quite nice, with all the trees and parks around these concrete monstrosities. But yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and I stand corrected. There's nothing wrong with the family pulling together and helping each other, especially nowadays. Yeah, the real estate market is absolutely crazy. What I meant by that is that when people are there because they are without aim, and they're just really can't figure out how to start living their own lives, and so that going back to the importance of family, and how so many people are pushing for more social programs to help people through the government. I don't really, and I would not endorse that. I think we do need social programs to a certain level, but once it becomes unsustainable and you're taxing the working class, and it's usually falls on the middle class, tax upon tax upon tax, and we have to pay for social programs which are really not necessarily justified or helpful, and the saying that give a man a fish and they will live another day, versus give a man a fishing net, teach them how to fish, and they will never go hungry again. And I think that's what our main focus should be, instead of creating all these different social safety nets where we motivate people to stay on sustainable welfare programs, not to make an effort to get an education, to get a job, and I never believed in unemployment. I think there's no such thing. There are, and again, I don't want to come across too critical or to say that the world is full of lazy people, but maybe the world is full of people who are aimless, or people who are not having the support system that they ought to have. And so if you have a family where mom and dad, and in a typical healthy family, mom and dad will always keep hitting you over the head to do your homework and to bring home good grades, and they want you to play the piano and to go and learn karate and to become a lawyer or a doctor or an engineer, or be all that you can be, and to try to bring out the best the best in you. So if and it's funny that some of these, and I have a lot of friends from all walks of life, and some of them they subscribe to some of these type of things, and they're more left leaning, and I always try to understand why they lean to the left, and it's coming from a good place. They're very compassionate, and again, they have empathy for other people, and they want to speak for the disenfranchised. So, but then again, I ask them, so here you are as a parent, wanting your kids to have all that, but from the other hand, you want the government to have this perpetual vicious cycle, in our country, where people are just not motivated to be all that.
Yeah.
So don't you find it a little bit funny, or you're contradicting yourself when here you are, wanting your kids to have all that, but you're super, but you're overlooking the shortcomings of the so-called disenfranchised masses, right?
Yeah, so, I don't know any intellectual, left or right. Regardless of you have to be a complete moron to not be in awe of the book, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Are you familiar with it? Oh, you have to read it. Viktor Frankl grew up in the Holocaust camps, and he survived. And his book is Man's Search for Meaning, and he lays out this whole why some people survived and why some didn't. And he ended up becoming a famous psychiatrist, which I am disgusted that in my entire psychology studies, his field of psychology, which is brilliant, was never mentioned. And I'm like, because it goes against the progressive narrative, what he's saying. Now, he basically said you need purpose. The people who survived the camps, even with no food, with no sleep, with the abuse, found purpose. Whether it was, I will find my lost love once I'm out of the camps, or I need to survive for that crow over. It didn't really matter. I forgot it specifically, but it showed purpose is so important. A purposeless existence is one not worth living. And you will see this when people don't have purpose, they just go into despair. Now, I'll relate this to the drug thing, addiction. Now, I was listening to Huberman Lab, brilliant professor, but he had Dr. Ann Lemke about talking about addiction. Now, a while back, I forgot when, there was this famous rat park study. Are you familiar with it at all? So the rat, and I believe it was done at UBC. I can't remember. One of the professors that I learned from at Kwantlen actually was an assistant on that. Now, what they did with the rats was they put them in like horrible conditions, and they isolated them, and they gave the rats cocaine-laced water and regular water. So when they gave the rats horrible conditions, they almost always went to the cocaine water. But when they allowed the rats to socialize and have fun, they'd almost always go to the water. Now, it's unusual for animals to choose, quote, poison water, but they were doing that. Now, I believe the conclusions that came out of that were not the greatest, in the sense that they concluded that they were correct in realizing that not all addictions are biological in nature. Some are, like if you're highly addicted to alcohol, you can't go cold turkey. Basically, anything you can't quit cold turkey is clearly there's a biological addictive faction. But a lot of things, even like cocaine, you can quit cold turkey because you're not addicted to it because it's chemically addicted. You're addicted to it because it's an escape. Now, this was then used by left-wing people to be like, you see, we have to treat people with dignity and all that, which is true. But I was listening to that Huberman Lab, and what she was saying is, well, actually, it's about purpose. Because she's like, who is it addicts? She was saying that actually in the modern time, it's the lower middle class and working class that has more free time than ever. 40% more free time than the upper class, because the upper class are always doing things. Maybe because they can afford to take classes and do stuff, but they're always doing things or being productive because they do have the resources to be able to do whatever they want. But the working and the middle, lower class and lower class have a lot of free time, as in they do their job and then they don't have to survive anymore. They can feed. And she was saying that actually what it is the people without purpose become addicted to stuff that's not chemically addictive. And if you look at a lot of rich kids, well, they're addicted to drugs because they say, I have no purpose. So it's not specific to having money or not money. It's specific. The connecting factor is purpose. And Man's Search for Meaning really, and the leftists know this, and the right people know this, and anyone with a brain knows you need purpose. But their ideas are not really acknowledging that if you create these social systems that need everyone to rely on the system, you're not giving people purpose. And it's going to be a disaster. It's just very clear what's going to happen. It's not going to go good. I think you wanted to jump in there.
But no, I look forward to reading those two books that you recommended, and I do agree with that, and so that's why it is important for the family to reinforce that. So when the next generation grows up and they take over from the generation that came before them, they are equipped to handle the new challenges, and that they will have a purpose, they will have something to live for. And you're right, oftentimes this nihilistic point of view from young people is truly sad, and I just can't even imagine being in that state of mind when you're walking around with your brand new Nike shoes, typing away on your expensive iPhone, being on social media, and you're probably living in a nice house with your mom and dad, or maybe even in your own condo, and you're criticizing the world around you, and nothing makes sense, and everything is bad, everything is just wrong, and you're just constantly angry, and you're angry at the world because you're thinking that the world owes you something, and that your failures, it's not something that you need to explore a little bit and to identify why there is, but you're projecting all that onto the rest of society and the world around you, and you're somehow waiting for that fried chicken to fly into your mouth without making an effort, and so I think that's where we are going wrong as a society with the next generation, that we live in the age of entitlement. And somehow people they think that they are entitled to all those things without making an effort. And I keep seeing these signs at protests when I watch the news that that this is my right, and et cetera, et cetera. Well, maybe it's not your right. Maybe it's something that you need to work on, and maybe healthcare professionals also, they deserve to get paid, and maybe there needs to be a two system, maybe a hybrid of socialized medicine versus the option of going private.
We
etc.,
actually
etc.
do have that here, but most people don't know it.
Exactly. But that's what I'm saying. So many people, they look at the world around them that we pay taxes, therefore, I need to get this and that, and I have a right to those services, and I need society and the government to take care of me. And a friend of mine once told me, this other great saying that the world owes you nothing. You should expect nothing from the world. You should earn everything, and that gives you purpose. When you go out there and you earn yourself a degree, or you go to trade school and you become a carpenter, a plumber, an electrician, you start your own little company and you work your butt off, 7 days a week, 16-hour days, and you build your own little company, and now you're responsible for 50 employees and so on and so forth, and that gives you purpose. Meanwhile, you're supporting your family and you're spending good family time with them, and maybe you find wonderful activities to do in your downtime, whether it's going hiking or camping or attending church services, where also kids can learn about values, and on religion. I just want to say one thing, and why I think if not necessarily religion, but some kind of spirituality or some kind of belief system needs to happen within a family. And I'm not criticizing people who are atheists or people who are more modern thinking, and they look towards maybe sciences, etc., etc. As long as you have something that makes sense to you, it's all good. But the reason why I like Christianity with its turbulent long history, if we look back the last 2,000 years, let's say, from the time of Christ, is because it also ties into all those wonderful stories that came before Christianity, and as you said, the purpose comes from those stories, and when even and again, I don't think we know enough about the cavemen to be able to speak for them, but whatever we are suspecting that the way they lived and the way they survived the elements and each other and attacks from wild animals and the other tribes, etc., etc., and whatever we learned from their burial sites and their rituals, and they were very ritualistic, and right there are signs of just that they were seeking meaning and purpose. And from ancient Greek mythology as well, it is just so interesting how people were trying to interpret our very existence, and that there's got to be something bigger and greater out there other than just ourselves. And even from a scientific point of view, if you look at nature and how life evolved on our planet, it is just we are at an awe of how awesome nature is, and through these stories and through our existence, and how for a very long time we were part of nature, and I guess before we ate from the apple, we were in seek of that meaning and purpose, and we were always going from point A to B, and we have that inner motivation, that urge to always be on the move and to be productive and to do something, and because if we don't, if we stop and if we stay idle, we become depressed, we start doing maybe drugs, we just kind of lose hope, and that's why I think spirituality, religion, a belief system, at least, it gives us hope. A man cannot live without hope. that today I had a really crappy day, or at training, I got my butt kicked and I did horrible, but if I work hard, next week at the class, I'm going to have a fantastic, time, and I did really good. I did well in karate or in school or at work, and how to cope with disappointments and failures in life ties into that, healthy mindset and the way we keep training ourselves to be strong and resilient. And that is now somehow, I think it's slowing down a little bit, and we cuddle people, we cuddle the next generation. We create safe spaces in colleges and universities. We provide more and more social safety nets for people to stay in that state of idleness. And we are seeing a bigger divide where the go-getters, the tough middle class, they go and work their butts off, and they produce and they do, and they feel the pressure, I think, and so that's why I think people should have more conversations. Again, one of the things that I really like about podcasts is that I see a lot of people getting engaged finally, because even within my circle of friends, sometimes I see people are shying away from conversations. That, oh, hey, Laszlo, we should not be talking about this because it's a taboo subject, and I don't want to hurt your feelings, or maybe someone will hear what I just said, and then they won't be my friends anymore. And it's so sad. Like growing up in communist Hungary, my dad couldn't care less. He was trying to find the right frequency for the voice of free Europe coming from Rome, and it was banned. It was
on the radio.
On the radio, it was an illegal radio station that you can't listen to. And a lot of people were listening to that, so that we can hear the real news, what's happening in the world, other than just listening to the communist propaganda. And the number one topic in these communist countries, or at least in Hungary, I know maybe not in East Germany, because every neighbor was probably a party member who was ready to tell on you to the thought police. But in Hungary, people were actively engaged in political discussions, and I find it extremely troubling and sad that in today's world, in the West, in the free West, where you should be able to enjoy freedom of speech, and people are still scared, and they want to avoid a whole bunch of different subjects.
I've seen this throughout the pandemic very clearly. A lot of people are very upset with me. They won't, and this is what bothers me, is they won't actually tell me they're upset with me. They just do with the modern thing of ghosting. And some of these people are adults, like in their 50s too. Like I come in like a wrecking ball on these topics because I don't care. I want to discuss, and I want to see where you're at and where I'm at. But people find it so off-putting because they've been conditioned not to talk about it because it's impolite or disrespectful. And this is how we're getting the propaganda from the media and people that they're misrepresenting material facts on a whole bunch of stuff. There's some truth to what they're saying, but it's how they're presenting the information that people believe things. It's like, wait a second. And because they don't want to talk about it, and if you talk about it, you're a conspiracy theorist or whatever. But I was like, listen, I don't think you understand that what they're telling you isn't exactly, it's modified truth. Because I can break it down to further truth, and all of a sudden it changes the narrative a little bit, and people just are so uncomfortable. Like a lot of the martial arts community didn't close down during this time because they knew it's not really getting enforced here, but they didn't want to talk about it. And as soon as the public started getting louder and louder and more panic because of fear and all this stuff, all of a sudden they're like, we have to do what we're being told to be good citizens. And I'm like, what the fuck? And there's very few people like, I know people, a lot of people don't agree with what's going on, but they're just being quiet and not saying anything. Then other people are like, we have to be good leaders and promote this. And I'm like, wow, I lost all respect for you. And they don't like me because I'm like a wrecking ball, right? Now, on a few things on the matter of truth and purpose with universities, I think what happened is, and I'm not sure it's always entirely true, but with universities, they forgot what it's about, which is the search for truth and ideas. And then whenever all of a sudden you let everybody in all the time with no matter what their level of capability and intellectual whatever, and then we come up with all these degrees that are meaningless and silly and full of false ideas. The universities started treating it like a business. Oh, the more students we have coming in, the more money we make. Even though they have billions and billions of dollars in some of their budget, some of these Ivy League schools. Well, the more people we let in, the better it is. And so then what it came to is we need to keep the students happy, because if the students aren't happy, we won't have people coming to our university. And so we have to do what the students want, and they forgot what their purpose was, which was higher education. Not job creation, higher education. The reason why higher education was a means to as a model to hire people, because back in the day, it's like, hey, if you had a university degree, you're probably quite a capable person as compared to everybody else. That's why employers started using it as a metric. However, now it's not that anymore, because now a lot of people get in university who are not capable, and they get PhDs, and they're not capable. They just did the work, but they're not actually really capable outside of checking boxes and doing what they need to do to get their grades. And so a lot of even corporations now are like, I don't really care if you have a degree anymore. And people are like, what? I told that to an African kid in university. He's like, I forgot what country he's from, probably Nigeria. I said to him, I don't think you realize that in North America, a degree has a lot less meaning. I'm like, if you get a degree here and you go back to Africa, it has a lot of meaning, because it still has that, oh, you were able to do this. You're probably quite capable. So it's kind of, they've lost their way, the education system. They forgot what their purpose, at least higher education. And then sort of on the purpose, there's a intellectual, he's not very well known outside of the tech world. His name is Naval Ramakant. He's brilliant. He is so angry right now at the way world is going, but he's like the guru that all the tech people go to for advice, like all the angel advisors. He's just a brilliant human being, but it's hard to find his work because it's kind of spattered all in random interviews and podcasts, and his Twitter feed is weird. But one of his quotes, he kind of, I'm going to butcher it. I always try to find it. I can never. But he said something about, like, you know, at a certain level of intellectualism, when you're having your existential crisis of what the purpose of life is, you will probably come to one of two conclusions. Is that you're either going to find God or have kids, because both will give you a sense of purpose of something beyond yourself. And that resonated with me and my wife so much, it was included in our wedding ceremony. Because I'm not a religious person, so our conclusion was, well, we should probably have kids, right? And we actually ended up getting married because of Jordan Peterson. I was like, I don't really care. But she's like, oh, we need a stable home. We need the marriage so that if we have kids, it's for them. It's like, okay, fine. I'll accept that point. So then we kind of got married. COVID kind of pressured it, just compressed it. You either came out stronger or you collapsed in the lockdown. So we went that way, and we're better for it, I think. But that quote is just like, I never thought about it like that. That again, it's the religious thing that actually Ben Shapiro was like, the people need something greater than themselves. Now, Naval Ramakant is not a religious person. Ben Shapiro is, but they both end up with the same conclusion of you need something beyond yourself in order to keep yourself, one, from having an existential crisis, but also so you don't just succumb to like animalistic, chaotic primate behaviors, which a lot of people, they just throw out structure and family and religion, and I don't need anything, and then you see how people behave. And they often come from families where there was no family. It was a disintegrated family, regardless of culture. You can go any country in the world. You look at the groups of people that don't have very strong family units or broken families, crime is higher. And they don't do as well in life. Yes, being born rich is very helpful in the modern day world, but how is it that some people do really well versus others? There was a U.S. senator, congressman. I can't remember, but I believe he was the first black congressman or senator. And he was telling the story of his grandfather. Now, he was raised by his grandparents, not his parents, because whatever. But he still had a family unit. His grandparents became his parents. That was his family unit. And he said every morning he woke up and his grandfather was reading the newspaper. And he didn't realize till way into adulthood his grandfather was illiterate. He wasn't reading the newspaper. He was setting a behavioral precedence about he sees his grandfather reading the newspaper every morning even though he can't read. It sets that image for him, and he became the first, I can't remember, the first black congressman or senator. And so it shows the importance of that in the home life. So your purpose is either find God or have kids, and you need to develop something that's beyond yourself, or live for something beyond yourself. Otherwise, you can very easily spiral to what's the point, which a lot of people, denialism kicks in. Right? For me, luckily, I found Krav Maga, and I think without, even though, financially, martial arts in Vancouver is not the most lucrative thing, but without it, my purpose became teaching other people and giving them something that I didn't have in the form of kind of mentor. I'm not the best, but in kind of mentorship and guidance, or giving them a perspective they never had. Because without it, there's a good chance I would have been lost and gone down some dark road or worse, because I never had purpose. Because religion, while I grew up in a Jewish home, we weren't a strong Jewish home. And, it was kind of, my parents are good people. They're not absentee parents, but there wasn't a strong structured. I wasn't told to do my homework. I could kind of do what I want because my mother sort of adopted the 90s attitude of, well, we want kids to have their freedom. And my dad, for work, for the family, had to work elsewhere and be other places. So I kind of did my own thing. And then I didn't really have purpose, especially when you don't really fit in with other people. You lose it and you don't have purpose. So I got into teaching martial arts out of circumstance rather than this is what I always wanted to do. But from it, I found my purpose. And beyond that, now I'm like, I want to start a family, because I think the next generation is super important. And ironically, it'll probably make you very happy. In the Canadian elections, actually, the youth vote is going more conservative, which you never would have thought. And it's like, what is going on here?
I saw that. There is hope for us yet.
Yeah.
And that's what makes us so colorful and diverse. It's not because we are forcing diversity, curriculums and courses on people, but because I think we were always like that. And with technology too, the world got much smaller. And so right now, you're in an interracial marriage and relationship with your wife being Asian. Same with me. My two kids are half Asians, and I never even thought about it. When I came to Canada as a kid, I was barely 18, and I started meeting people, and Canada was so colorful. Like in behind the Iron Curtain, we were all white. It was Hungarians. Sometimes you would see a foreign exchange student, of a different color, and everybody would look like, oh wow, that person doesn't look like us. But it was also so cool. But regardless of what your background is, and whether you had some kind of disadvantages in life, that makes you awesome in your own rights. That you managed to overcome whatever disadvantages you may have had. When I came here, I didn't speak the language, so English is a second language for me, and I had no money, I had no education, nothing. Like if you can really put your finger on something, on a disadvantaged person, I was definitely one of those people. And I did work, in pretty crappy jobs, and my first legal job that I didn't have to do under the table. Finally, when I received my papers from Canada Immigration, I was working for an East Indian fellow. He was the only one who would hire me. I applied to so many other companies, and nobody would hire me. Because I was qualified for nothing. And I said, look, I'm willing to do anything. I'm very hardworking. I'm going to make you proud. And so he gave me a chance. I was a carpet cleaner helper. And how special was $38. It took us roughly 2 hours to do, and I was getting 10% of every job. So I was getting roughly $1.90 or something per hour. That was my hourly rate minus tax. And I wasn't getting paid for the travel time between clients. So yeah, those were humble beginnings, and this was in 1988 or 89.
Right after I was born.
So yeah, there you go. Okay, so yeah, I'm in my 50s now, and it seems like yesterday, but it was great, and I was so thankful for this person, and we became good friends. And then later on, as I was, learning how to speak the language and putting myself through school, and well, at first I didn't even have money to go to school, so I was kept reading my dictionary and memorizing words and trying to learn from the radio and the TV how to put those words together into coherent sentences. And so he gave me a wonderful reference letter, and then the next place was already a little bit better. Working at a fast food restaurant, and I kept going to school and working, and you slowly with a little bit of an effort, or maybe a lot of effort, you can make some great advancements in your life, and sometimes it's not even the end result, and when you get to be 50, 60, 70, you're at the end of your life, and you look back, and it's not about you having a Rolls-Royce parked in your garage, or having millions of dollars in the bank, or having a big house, but to look back on the journey. And to see how amazing that life was, and again, for 350,000 years, I mean, there was no Rolls Royce and a big house and a bank account and all that, and people had to contend with whatever they had, whatever life was for them. For the most part, humanity was starving and sleeping under trees or under a rock, or they were dealing with all kinds of illnesses and famine and war and the elements. So for them, and again, to put human existence into perspective, I think we need to keep reminding ourselves how lucky we are, living in this day and age, and what happiness is. Just because you're being born rich into a family where mom and dad will give you a Rolls Royce for your 18th birthday, it does not make you happy, or not necessarily. And the novelty of that car will wear off in 2 minutes. So I think the journey that we're on is what matters. Our failures, our abilities to pick ourselves up and to soldier on, and to work towards something really great. And I agree with you 100% that one or the other. I mean, if people they don't, it's not a prerequisite to be religious. And I also have mixed feelings on religion. The older I get, and the more metaphysical I get on existence and all the rest of it. That family is definitely what gives everybody that's really good foundation, and people without families, I think they do the next best thing, and they take part in society, and they work very hard to become useful, contributing members of society, and be there for their friends and their parents, hopefully, their colleagues, their clients. And we are social beings, and you can't avoid that. There needs to be some sense of family, some sense of belonging. And there are different forms. There could be different forms of family, and I think the martial arts world is also a great example for that type of family and that sense of belonging. And I truly believe that if people are just becoming a little bit more humble and more grateful, these days, then we really we stand a very, very good chance of living in a prosperous world where we can spread all that prosperity, into other parts of the world which are less successful for whatever reason. And that maybe brings us to the next segment. I don't know how much longer we want to keep talking on other things. Yeah. Okay.
I just wanted to add to that. It might have been Naval. I can't remember. My wife's going to kill me that I don't remember who said it. But happiness is where expectations meet reality. It's like a really good quote.
I agree with that.
So yeah, go on with what we were saying.
Well, when we look at the great divide between the West and the rest of the world, I think the way to create a unified community worldwide where we can truly appreciate each other is not by destroying Western civilization. It's not by bringing down borders, and it's not by mixing people willy-nilly or replacing certain ethnic groups or populations here and there, but it's through learning from each other, and I think going back to that competitive spirit. When I'm a sucker for the ancient world, and I love ancient China in particular. I like to read up on their wonderful culture and history going back 5,000 years plus. There's so much to learn from the ancient world, whether it's the Chinese, the Egyptian, the Greek, the Hittites, the Persians, the India. It would be a pity for us to throw all that away and to start from scratch. And I don't think that anyone in their right mind would suggest that. And I think we would do well to preserve all that we have learned, but the same goes for the Europeans, and sometimes I feel a little bit frustrated when my culture is being criticized, and in the past few years Hungary was also singled out for Hungary and Poland as well. The way they are approaching emigration. And so I think every country has a responsibility to protect and to preserve their identity, their culture, their traditions, their customs, and when you look at all other countries outside of the Western Hemisphere, somehow that's perfectly normal and acceptable, and the left supports that. But when it comes to Hungary, Poland, the entire Europe, it needs to be somehow demolished and undone, because they were the colonizers. And again, going back to what I said earlier about this lack of understanding. And again, I'm not a historian, and I'm not an educated person per se. I'm pretty much self-taught, and I did go to school, and I did pay attention as much as I could as a young person. You need to look at history pragmatically, and you need to again appreciate the contribution of all these different countries, and you have to take it with a grain of salt, and you have to recognize all the good and the bad, and it goes hand in hand. And it wasn't the Europeans who did wrong by the world. They did plenty. But they were, and how should I'm trying to organize my thoughts here.
The way I would put it is, people have a failure to contextualize behaviors in the historical context.
Yes,
so
that's it.
A lot of what Europeans did, quote, did or did not do or whatever, by today's moral standards, are not great. But then you're like, everyone was doing that.
Exactly.
Including other black people in Africa.
Yes.
Enslaving each other. And they still do that to this day. There's an open slave market in Libya.
After all the horrors of human history, and you're right, slavery, for example, I mean, it happened and it was practiced for thousands of years, throughout the world. And I don't think that the Hungarians or the Polish or the Norwegians or the Finn ever went to North Africa to grab some black slaves and take it back to Hungary and Poland. To use Ilhan Omar's words, some people did something, and in Europe too. I think it was a few countries. It was, I think, Spain, Portugal, England, France. I think the Dutch were in it too for a while. But then it was also the European countries that opened up for the world, and they were inviting the rest of the world in, and then the New World as well, the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. These were places where people could go from wherever, and they could become that. They could become Americans. Or Canadians, or Australians, etc. And it's just it's amazing that after all those horrors, whatever the Europeans did, through colonization and war and this and that we finally arrived to that point where we recognize that those things were wrong. Let's do better, and we can do better. And so this is how we do it. And so that needs to be, I think, appreciated. Other countries who also waged wars, and some countries, they even had, centuries-old civil wars, whether it was in China, the Warring States, whichever context you want to put that in, whether it's Japan, where the shogunates were killing each other, and one samurai tribe went against the other, and they were slaughtering each other for centuries. And same thing on the continent of Africa. When you look at all the different tribes there too, I mean, they were enslaving each other, they were going to war, and even during prehistorical times. I mean, that's where all that comes from. We were taking each other's stuff. We one tribe attacked the other, and
for resources.
For resources, yeah. Yes. I mean, to not to look at this, these horrible events in its entirety, and to recognize that every tribe, every nation, every country had a growing up to do, and it took us again thousands and thousands of years to arrive to this point in time. And history is something that we need to cherish, something that we need to learn from, and I think once we start doing that, and once we start embracing all that, then we can move forward instead of doing what we're doing right now.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It's a good example is Afghanistan. So people are framing it as these endless wars, and it's immoral and it's wrong and Now, up until now, I would have said that the greatest military mistake of the last 30 years was going into Iraq, and then the second greatest one was leaving Iraq. And now we have this giant debacle. Now, going into Afghanistan was not as problematic as going into Iraq was. I don't think there was any legitimate grounds to have gone into Iraq at the time, but Afghanistan, they had a legitimate purpose. We need to root out the radical Islam that would be willing to attack the West, 9/11. The problem is where corruption kicks in. I am very much against the military-industrial complex. It's a very unnecessary, because in doing so, you're not actually trying to solve anyone's problems, just trying to make a few people very wealthy. So the fact that they approached the war in the long run as military-industrial complex is why it kind of turned into a disaster. The concept of nation building is not a bad thing. It's that all the money was going into the hands of the arms people and corruption. And now we leave Afghanistan in the most atrocious way possible. And you can see when people lose sight of what's the reality of things, they'll justify atrocious things. Like, I saw a poll in America that something between 70 and 85% of Americans, Democrat, Independent, Republican, were like, this is a disaster. This was badly done. And yet you see the leadership saying, no, it's a great success. And everyone's like, are you insane? So we can sit here and say the morality of the military-industrial complex is bad. I agree. It's a bad thing, and they need to stop making money. Surely, purely doing war and maintaining war for the sake of money, that's unethical, immoral, and wrong. But if anyone thinks leaving Afghanistan like that is a good idea, as in, they're blaming it on Trump, it's like, you're out of your goddamn mind. He would never have done it like this. No chance. Because, okay, we agree, we're leaving. We're getting out. You get the people out. You can get your equipment out. You scale back your military, and you leave. You don't just say, we're done. Everyone out. What's the plan? No plan, get out. And then someone running their mouth saying, we need to be out by this date. And everyone's like, who said that date? And then the Taliban says, okay, agreed. What? And then people are going to be, you're probably going to get 100, 200,000 person massacred. As per, I remember, I took a study, a course, The Psychology of Genocide. Now, hilariously, the professor was an Indian who was extremely left-wing woke, which I found really strange. But he had a professor come in, I forgot his name, UBC professor, who was his professor, who actually also is a Holocaust survivor. We had 2 Holocaust survivors and a Rwanda genocide survivor. And the Holocaust survivor, who's a professor, was talking about statistics of the UN. The UN has basically become this giant waste of money and corruption, essentially. And he said every single time there's a conflict zone, and there's going to be conflict, the day after the UN leaves, everyone gets killed. Because the only thing that stops those psychotic people like the Taliban from massacring anyone who doesn't agree with them is them knowing there's 1,000 people with guns that can fight back well. But because it's been ideologued and the wrong arguments are being made, yes, military-industrial complex is bad. Wars for the sake of war is bad. The Taliban probably could have been wiped out if you were actually there to wipe them out, just like they did with ISIS rather quickly, and ISIS kind of disappeared as soon as the military was given the command, get rid of them, rather than, well, we need to play these games for moral and we don't really belong there. Well, no, ISIS is bad for Muslims, let alone the West. The Taliban is not great for anyone. It's not great for the Afghani people, let alone the West. Women are screwed now in Afghanistan. So all these people talking about women's rights, like Marianne Monsef, our lovely minister of whatever the hell she's the minister of in Canada, referring to them as our brothers. Like, are you out of your mind? Like, she basically doesn't want to make any Muslim look bad ever, even they're doing atrocious things. And it's like, they're going to kill people, and they are killing people. And Canadian, American governments have basically abandoned everyone that was left behind. Said, hey, you guys have a month. Wait, you said we were fine and didn't need to go anywhere. I need more time than that. Nope. I think there's 1,200 Canadians or so still left behind, probably 2,000-3,000 Americans. They basically, said, oh, green card? Don't care. You're not a citizen. We don't care. Wait, what? The same arguments still apply to the immigrants who illegally came into their country. They're double standarding everything. And then you find out that, they brought out like 100,000 Afghanis. And then you find out that a large percentage of them weren't people that were supposed to come out. They're just people who rushed the plane and they just let them on. And so you don't know who half these people are. They actually found a convicted murderer that had been convicted of murder in somewhere else and kicked back to Afghanistan rather than dealing with the penal system. And he got onto the plane. And yet, there was that team that they did Mission Pineapple Express, which, you know who Tim Kennedy is? He's a UFC fighter and a Green Beret and he does all this crazy. He's like the American, like America. Him and a whole bunch of other special force guys, like 10 or 15 of them, went against Biden's orders and went and rescued 500 or 700 of their friends, the translators, and all these people and all that.
I actually heard that.
Yeah. And I don't know. I bet you they're going to try to court-martial them, but if they do, I think they have to let it go that this group of special force guys blatantly ignored orders and went and did it anyway. Because that's moral fortitude. That's saying, hold on a second. These Afghanis that helped us and we should bring back, you're abandoning them. But you will then let in unchecked people at the southern border come in COVID positive. You'll let them come in the hundreds of thousands without question. But you're abandoning people we actually know are good people. I'm personally vetting for this person. I want them to be an American citizen. And they abandon a lot of them. They abandon their own citizens. That's the issue with these ideologues, is that as long as it's over there, I don't really care. But when it suits me here, I'll play it however I want. I was talking about this in the other podcast. Trudeau, he's being booed and chased out of everywhere. And there is some issues with don't get aggressive because violence will usually in the West make your cause lose. So being overly aggressive with him is not a good thing. But he was in a campaign stop where he's inside. I forgot whatever the hell he's talking about. The guy's a narcissist asshole. You can hear booing outside the building and chant and police sirens. And he says, I can hear you Canadians and what you want is environmentally friendly attitudes. It's like, dude, they're protesting you narcissist. But people will justify what he's doing because they think, oh, he's not that bad. Or he suits my needs. I'm getting something out of him. So despite the fact this person's an unethical lunatic, and people like, you need to stop using these inflammatory words about this person. I'm like, name one other prime minister who probably should actually quite literally be in jail due to actual potential crimes he's committed, and it's easy to prove. The podcast I did before this was a lot more political, and they said I'm being harsh on my words, and I said, do you believe he's committed a crime? At all, just any crime. I think so, probably. I'm like, so how are my words harsh if this is our leader and you're admitting he's probably committed a crime? And it's like, but it wasn't the case with him, but a lot of people will justify it because they've decided, well, these ideas are worth it. It's like, not at the destruction of everything. And we're seeing that.
And that's exactly what I'm seeing in politics too. That sometimes people they have this attachment to a person, and they start idolizing, someone like Trudeau or Biden or Kamala Harris, and what these people represent in their head because of their ideology. And I stand for all these things, and if I vote for that person, then my utopian world will come true because they are my wizards, and with their magic wand they're going to make all these wonderful things happen. And so that's why I think people who are, let's say, supporting Trump, they take it with a grain of salt, and we conservatives too, when we talk about whether it's Trump, whether it's Stephen Harper, whether it's Churchill, Reagan, or Margaret Thatcher, all these great leaders, we don't want them to be saints. We don't want them to be perfect, because we recognize the fallacies of human society and the individual, and we do the best we can. Going back to our earlier conversation on what conservatism is, and if you just simply follow those common sense rules, and if you try to do right by your people within that country, and most other countries are doing it. They have borders, and they have a strict immigration system. And some countries you can't even emigrate to some countries because that's how adamant they are about maintaining the status quo, or maybe the purity of their country, their race, the way you do things. And again, emigrating to America, anyone can become an American or a Canadian or an Australian. Try to emigrate to China,
does not happen.
or Japan, or Malaysia or Vietnam, or whatever. I mean, or go to India. I mean, you can travel to these countries. You can even work there for 20 years or 30 years, or you can even live your entire life there, on a green card or a work visa, or get married to a person of that nationality and heritage, but you will never become, Chinese or Japanese or Indian or Vietnamese or whatever. So that's why the West is so great, and even in Europe. I mean, if someone wants to go to France, I mean, they will live a pretty happy life there, or in Hungary or Poland or whatever. You have to make an effort. And I think you can assimilate into that culture fairly well if your motivation to live there and to go there is true and is for the right reasons. But even there, you will never become a French or Hungarian or Polish. It takes maybe a couple of generations for your descendants, to become that. But yeah, when it comes to emigration, I think in the West we are doing this all wrong now. And how in the world can you not vet immigrants? I went through that, and I had to jump through a whole bunch of different red tape and interviews and fill out paperwork and work my buns off to pay for the processing fees and to stand in line and to wait my turn, etc., etc. And it took years for me to get the Canadian citizenship. And so for us to bypass that well-proven system is going to cause some problems, for a country. It's just like when you're hiring a person, within your company, and there you are, let's say, as an HR person, and you're going through interviews, and you have 2 positions to fill, and you have 50 people for those 2 positions. Obviously, you want to interview the best of the best, and you want to hire the top 2 people from that group. And it's perfectly fair. Same thing with who's coming into your house. I mean, you're not going to leave the door wide open and anyone can just walk in, get into your fridge, eat your food, sleep here, whatever. You also have you have a choice. You should have a choice who's going to work for your company, who's going to come into your house. And on a grand scale, within a country too, a country will have the right to vet immigrants and to select the right people who will come here for the right reasons, people who fell in love with what you have done in your country. They want to become part of that social compact. People who wants to do as you do. People who would like to learn the language, get a job, teach their children the Canadian or the American or the Hungarian or the Polish values or the Chinese or the Japanese, and it's these are perfectly reasonable expectations, and but apparently not.
Yeah. So for me, it's like, so people often will be like, America was founded on immigration, correct, but things were different there. You were on your own, the Statue of Liberty, you bring us your tired, your weak, whatever. What they wanted is if you could make it across that ocean and survive and then get there, you probably had what it take to build something. They were looking for people hungry enough to build something, and you were very much on your own. And even like you look at the New York, well, actually they were very racist towards each other back then. The Immigrants versus like Gangs in New York is not the most historically accurate movie, but it gives you some perspective of how it might have actually been. And even even in the 70s, it was very much like that in New York. So people have these delusions of the past of how idealized it was. Now, when you have all these socialized systems, which again, we've discussed, there's some merit to it, but if it's done wrong, which it's being done wrong, they're not great. Now, when everyone's relying on the system, if you bring people in unchecked and unchecked numbers without question, the system will fail. Because now that you've made everyone reliant on the system, while back then they were not reliant on the system will simply collapse because it cannot sustain the numbers that you're doing. That's why having an immigration limit every year, numbers-wise. This is how much we can bring in objectively without the system being bogged down. And that's what we're getting. Is let's say a Canadian, people actually don't realize to this day it's very hard to legally immigrate to Canada, very difficult. And if you immigrate illegally, they kick you out. And so Canadians are looking at Americans like, and I'm like, you do realize if you're a legal immigrant and get caught here, they will kick you out of the country. I know some people who had to get the hell out really fast because they came here illegally, and people don't know that. And then where this goes sideways is when, let's say, certain prime ministers use immigration as a political tool and then just bring in a whole bunch of refugees. There's nothing wrong with bringing in refugees, but bringing them in at large numbers, dumping them in the same areas or in places that they have no support, and then saying, here's a little bit of help, and then a year later abandoning them, and they're like, I don't know what to do in this country. Actually, a lot of the Syrian refugees were interviewed later on and were like, I want to go back. I don't know what to do in this country. Because they were brought under false pretenses on both ends. Not everyone, some of them. And they're like, I don't like this country. I don't know what to do here. I'm not integrated. I don't know how anything works. I can't get work. I thought you were going to support me. And I got in some fights with people. I got to stay off Facebook for this purpose because people are like, you're a racist. I'm like, that's not what I'm saying, guys. I'm saying you can't bring in mass people without integration and expect not to have problems. And, a few people were killed from a result of that immigration push because they brought in people who were very questionable. There was some rapes and murders done by these. It's not all of them. It's a small percentage of them. But because they failed to vet people coming in and just kind of dump them, that will happen. And they say, no, you're just a racist. I'm like, that guy killed someone. And he had a known history of violence that you knew about. And you didn't deport him because he was one of the people that you brought in during that political thing. And that's where people get lost, is they don't really understand what's going on. They think they do based on the ideas, and then they don't actually realize what their politicians are doing. Now, we haven't talked about COVID too much. Probably it's not a good idea to get too much into it with you, but I just did the whole last podcast I did. I was going off about the misrepresentation of the data. They're being misrepresentative on purpose. To cover up each one of their screw-ups, they misrepresent the next set of data and misrepresent the next set of data. And people who aren't really paying attention will look at the data and say, like, the Daily Hive and be like, oh my God, this is happening. And then, like, can we do a breakdown of what this data means? And because when I break it down, it gives you a very different picture of what's going on. An example was I was looking in Ontario. I found out today, but in Ontario, if you get the first vaccination and you go to the hospital and then they test you for PCR, which they will, the PCR testing. All the PCR testing does is say you have an infection. So you could get the flu or you could just have a negative reaction to the vaccine. Well, if it's within 14 days in Ontario, I get my first jab, I'm in the hospital in 3 days, I test positive for COVID, you'll be listed as unvaccinated. Now in BC, I found out today it's 21 days. Now the reason why they do that is in their heads is because any vaccine, you won't be able to develop the immunity properly from within that amount of time, give or take. But they're in the hospital because of the vaccine. It didn't kill them, but you're listing it as unvaccinated when they're clearly there as a negative response to that vaccine. It's lying. Now in court they'll probably get away with it, but they're presenting the information in a way that most people believe something that's not the truth, which is, only unvaccinated are causing the problem. It's like, what's the breakdown of age again? And what's the breakdown of when did they get their first vaccination? Because I guarantee if we break it up into sort of those three groups, I'm sure there are people who are completely unvaccinated who finally feel safe to come out of the woodworks and now got the infection. But again, that PCR testing throws a little loop into everything because they could just have a bad flu, but they tested positive. Anyways, so without breaking it down properly into all these different correct groups, you're getting misleading information. And so now people believe something that's untrue. So the same is with immigration. Bringing in refugees is good because they're taking a moral stance. On the surface, that's a statement. That's a true statement. If they're coming from a war-torn place, we want them to come live a better life. Okay. But you need to factor in the systems. You need to factor in that certain people in North America believe you should never integrate people because we need diversity. And it's like you're screwing them just as much as you're screwing other people. Because again, in the old days, you had to survive. One of my uncle's marriage's father immigrated to Canada in like the 30s or the 20s. They said, hey, we're giving out land in Saskatchewan for free. It's yours. But you have to walk from Quebec to Saskatchewan. A lot of people died on that way. His father made it. And because he got land, they now had value. They don't do that anymore. They're not giving opportunity for success. They're coming in and looking. A lot of people, they're looking at them as a tax revenue source, as opposed to actually giving them a better life and contributing properly. And people just don't understand that's actually the silly game that's going on, and it's being sold to people as something that it's not. That's why a lot of people fall to the emotions and the ideas, but from a practical application, they don't really understand what's going on. And anyone who questions it is being called all sorts of names as a distraction from the fact people are pointing out, hey, something's wrong here and it needs to be fixed. No, it's not. You're a racist. Or no, it's not. You're an anti-vaxxer. Or no, it's not. It's like, all I'm saying is you're misrepresenting what's going on here. And people don't want to listen because they do the appeal to authority. You don't have a doctor or you're not a politician. I mean, half the politicians don't even know what the heck is going on. They just do whatever the party tells them. And it's like, that's the problem, is people are too distracted with silly things to realize what's actually going on. So that when criticism come up, they believe the bullshit as opposed to fair criticism. And that is, if it's not solved soon, I think we're going to have problems, serious problems soon in society.
And that's why the right questions need to be asked and discussed. And you're absolutely right. When you're trying to raise these questions, you will be shut down. That you're not allowed to ask questions. I'm a huge fan of immigration, being an immigrant myself, and I think the immigrants from all around the world, from all different countries, they brought their ideas, their hard work, their enthusiasm, to their new homes, and they need to be cherished and valued, and that type of diversity needs to be celebrated. But again, diversity to me means maybe a little bit something different, or probably does mean something completely different from the left. For me, it's about diversity of thought, while we are all buying into that same membership. And immigrants, when they need to come for the right reasons. They need to love their new country. They need to pledge allegiance to the flag and what it stands for. They need to celebrate our history with all the bad and all the good. If you come to a country because you want to bring your values from those countries, I'm losing chain of thought here. If you're going to bring, let's say, bad values with you, that you can't leave behind because you came from a poor third world country, and nowadays you're not even allowed to say third world country because that's politically incorrect and it's condescending or whatever. But if you are from that disadvantaged background, the whole point of you coming here is because you want to adapt better values. You want to learn from your new country the way this society works, and the reason why we achieved all this greatness better than your home country is because of the following. And again, some people will call that, bigoted, and you're a racist, and et cetera, et cetera. But there is such a thing as a culture that's better or more successful. And throughout the ages, that competition again, it comes in cycles too. For a few centuries, this country will rule, and you had all these great empires like the Roman Empire and the Persians, and they kept alternating, and that's just the nature of things. And so once the immigrants are here, you're right. There also needs to be a right number, like a number that we can absorb, and a number that is not going to overwhelm our resources. And then again, that diversity and that sense of community, regardless of race and ethnicity and all that, it will happen organically. And again, you won't even have to teach that. I mean, I think it was Thomas Sowell who said it best, that racism was already on life support, and it was all but gone until the left started pitting us against each other, and they started teaching this in school, not a critical race theory and stuff. Most people they don't think about race, and a few people. I mean, there will be always some ding dongs out there, who are racist or bigoted or whatever, and we as flawed human beings, we will always say something or do something that we might regret later out of ignorance, or we end up putting our feet in our mouths, and but as long as we also recognize that we said something inappropriate, or we approach this person with a preconceived notion, or we kind of judge that person by their appearance, or the saying, don't judge a book by its cover. I think we are on the right path, and for the most part, our society is, or we were, and then this happened, and I think finally the parents are standing up, and they want to get rid of the critical race theory.
It's funny you say that, because I follow all sorts of media, even things I despise, and I do follow the English Chinese news on Facebook and the RT. I know their propaganda, but it's interesting to see what their perspective. And I saw a couple articles from both of them that are like laughing at critical race theories, saying this is what's going to destroy America. That's their perspective. They're like, this whole thing. I think it's all China's doing at this point. They've infiltrated corporate America. I figured this out because the BC company Arcturix. It's a BC company, a clothing company. And they have an entire military line of clothing. So they support the military. But here's the thing. I believe in 2016 or 17, they were bought out by a Dutch or European company. And last year or the year before, they got bought out by the largest sporting Chinese conglomerate. So now, through tiered layers, China essentially owns this BC company. And only in the last year are you hearing out of this company saying, we no longer support anything to do with firearms and military and this. And people were like, wait, what? You guys have a military line? And there was some PR person or some person who had this comment that went viral. And I'm like, I'm very confused. I'm like, I looked into it and I found out, well, now they're owned through a third party, through another company, a company that owns a company, a Chinese giant conglomerate. That is the reason why corporate America is doing this crap. You look at Hollywood and Disney, they're getting most of their money from China now. That's why they're supporting this nonsense, because it's follow them. A Rush Hour 2, the movie, the Jackie Chan movie, Chris Tucker, they said follow the rich white guy. Well, really, it's follow the money. Well, the money is actually leading back to China. China doesn't need to disrupt North America through military means. They're doing it through cultural means. Now, the accusations that Russia interfered with all Russia did, actually, hilariously, Russia didn't break any laws in the 2016 election. They were just trolling people on Facebook. They did a masterful job. That's all they were doing. They did not break any laws. They followed all the rules. And that's why Facebook got so upset, because Facebook wasn't paying attention to who's paying for what and who's doing what. You know, there is some merit to that's how Trump got elected. It's not to call it Russian interference, some grand conspiracy. It's like, no, they literally screwing with you guys. They think it's funny. I think it's funny because you guys got trolled, basically. But what China's doing is planned, coordinated, and global. And they're infiltrating everything because they know that the downside of capitalism is greed, unchecked greed. And they've infiltrated Hollywood, and they've infiltrated corporate America, and they've infiltrated it. And since their company's own, they'll send down just very subtly, like, hey, this is the new corporate stance. If you don't agree with it, you're fired, or whatever. And people don't realize that this is going on. And I was listening to, I think it was like The Economist or BBC or whatever, and they had, I think, some Iranian person saying, oh, this brouhaha about China is just them being imperialistic. And it's like, okay, the accusations of the Democrats against Russia were proven to be quite unfounded. The only thing that they did do was the Facebook thing, which again is funny but very sad. That's all they did. And so when you're looking at what China's, I've heard intelligence people talk about this, saying China is a problem. I've heard other people, experts, everywhere, all economists are like, China is a problem. Even the Democrats have quietly kept a lot of Trump's policies against China quietly because they realized, oh crap, he might be right. And you're seeing the signs on the wall that China is trying to collapse the West through economic means, subtly, by simply hijacking their systems, using money. While simultaneously, I don't know if you saw in the news, right now China is cracking down on their own populace even more. Right? They took over Hong Kong. They're probably going to make a play for Taiwan soon. They just said kids under 18 are limited to video games for 1 hour every Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and holidays. Or I don't know about Sundays. They're also cracking down on celebrities. Celebrities had free reign. Now they're cracking down because what's happening, their one-child policy is backfiring. And their economy, which people largely say was a false economy, that's what happens when you keep spending money and building bullshit projects in giant cities that are empty and all this nonsense they spent money on just to get spending and get people jobs. The one-child policy has now kicked in, combined with actually capitalism, is that now they did the math and realized they don't have enough workers in 20 years to sustain what they've built because they don't have the next generation. And they also have, through capitalism, people have realized in China, like, I don't want to do this job for this money. I want to get paid more. I want to learn more. I want to be more. And China's simultaneously cracking down on their own people because they're starting to get free thought, and they don't like that, while using resources from the West and collapsing the West to collect resources to make them survive. If China could, they'll just isolate themselves and then draw from outside. It would kind of be like they're doing colonialism in many ways. It's just subtle and it's craftier. It's not so aggressive and violent. And so, why some of this stuff happening is follow the money. It goes back to China. Who stands to make money? China. And they're actually collapsing, and they're trying to desperately save themselves now. And it's actually this hilarious circle of shenanigans that this is why everything is weird, because people are puppet mastering. But you follow the money, and that seems to point in that direction consistently.
And I think these are the things that people need to dig into a little bit more to understand the grand scheme of things, which is getting quite convoluted, and you also look at the banking systems. I read a very interesting article on that as well, and again, I'm not a financial expert, but you look at our real estate market now. You look at some of the events that's happening, with the central banks, et cetera, and I don't think that people are having the right conversations, and I think I blame, for the most part, I blame the media,
right.
The bought and paid for biased left-wing media. We are now getting our information from each other, from social media, through research. We can't trust, Global, CTV, all these media sources. The protests around hospitals, they were organized by doctors and nurses, and on the media it was totally misrepresented that anti-vaxxers are, protesting around hospitals, locking down the entryway, and ambulance and sick people can't get in, etc., etc. It is just so sickening, and even people who are blindly following mainstream media, and that's their only source of information. Even people like that can see that the reporting is always quite one-sided. My thought on the vaccines, going back to that a little bit, is that we really need to clarify also what's what. All these people, like I'm also a person, I'm not an anti-vaccine person. I admire medicine and science, but as far as I know, these products, these new drugs, do not qualify to be called vaccines. They are experimental gene therapy drugs, and these drugs may or may not kill you or cause some serious harm.
Yeah, I just clarify because I don't want you to get thrown under the bus. So the gene therapy thing is, what I would say is that the mRNA technology itself is old, and they'll use that to defend it, but using it in widespread human use is new. And nobody can answer, do you have long-term data on how this is going to affect people? Because they don't have it, because it just possibly cannot exist. Now, the reason why I would say it doesn't qualify to be called a vaccine, because to me, I don't care what the definitions are. To me, a vaccine is everyone gets this. You take it once or twice, depending on exactly how it works. You don't have to take it again because it basically stops you from getting it. It stops you from spreading it. End of story. Well, this is a coronavirus. This I don't consider this a vaccine. It's an inoculation. It boosts your immune system. How it does that, again, there's some question. Certainly, there's no long-term data. It's a gene therapy or not, I'm still like, well, I wouldn't go so far. I know I've heard interviews where people suggest that. Now, it may be true, maybe not be true. But again, I will just default to what's not controversial. There is no long-term data. None. And while, yes, it is true that the short-term data is that for most people, it is relatively safe in the short term. You don't have the long-term answer. It's not a thalidomide. It's not like that. It's certainly not. Otherwise, we'd know by now. But it's not what they're saying it is. For sure, it's not what they're saying it is, because it's not doing what they said it would do. They've stopped talking about herd immunity once they realized we might only need 40 to 50% for this particular virus, not the traditional 95 like they were basing their models on. They stopped talking about natural immunity, which consistently proves to be a thing in younger people. And when you ignore the fact that this isn't, it's not as dangerous as some people are saying it is, but it's not as safe as some people are saying it is. I've said it many times. I don't think a healthy person must take it as a means to save humanity. I think that's a lie. If you feel it's the appropriate thing for you, evidence suggests, hey, take it. Where the slippery slope goes is, are you going to keep making us take this thing over and over and over again and use vaccine passports? Because now we're going down the road of authoritarian control and not about protecting public health. Because if it turns out we need to keep taking this thing over and over again, guess what? Doesn't do what it said it does, and now potentially you're killing natural immunity's ability to work, which for a lot of people should have been proven before vaccines were available by the fact that most young people got it that I know of and were fine. Some people had some complications. Yes, some young people died, but statistically, you're more likely to be hit by a car in Richmond than dying from getting COVID if you're a young person. And I often leave out the comorbidities. To this day, it's still in BC where we live. 80% of the people still dying are older or have comorbidities.
And yeah, I totally agree with everything that you said. But the reason why so many people are not trusting these so-called vaccines is because of that.
It doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense. There are so many unanswered questions. What type of vaccine this is? What is the safety data, etc., etc. And when you have more and more specialists, virologists and vaccinologists are coming out to question it themselves and to say, well, this is my take on it. And Dr. Ryan Cole was from Idaho.
Oh yeah,
he's a virologist. One of his presentations was quite revealing and an eye opener for many. Is that when he talks about, and he's trying to put the data into a proper context and how we need to interpret those numbers. And when he talks about underlying health conditions and the age groups and the 2.7 million people who died around the world, allegedly from COVID.
I think officially it's higher than that now, but I don't think it's as high as they've said it is personally.
But no, and that's exactly whatever that number is. Let's say 2 million or 3 million, whatever. I saw the 2.7 in one of the articles recently. Maybe it was an older one, but he was also saying that you need to take that with a grain of salt because the majority of the people who died with COVID, and there's another interesting thing that he said, or it was one of those other doctors. It says, did these people die with COVID or from COVID? Like there's a difference.
Yeah.
And so when you're let's say at the end of your life, and the average lifespan is around 75, and when people they start dying from old age and underlying health conditions, by then you may have some heart condition, you have diabetes, you have kidney and liver failure, etc., etc. And I'm not saying, I mean, I love my mom. She's 82 now, and we protect her and we cherish her, and hopefully she will be with us for a long time. And you definitely don't want to discount seniors and the elderly, but when you look at things objectively and to say, well, if you're at the end of your life and you already have those health conditions, and now you get the flu or pneumonia that will push you over the edge, and because of those complications you will now die. These statistics, I mean, this is just the normal natural progression that we will all go through. Forget COVID-19. Even if COVID-19 would not exist and did not come into our lives, that's the way life works. We are born, we live, and then we die. And so if we're going to look at that, then over 90%, or I think his number was like over 97 or 98% of that number should be taken out. And then other people, again, the rest who died from COVID, it wasn't really from COVID, it was maybe from a complication because they already had other underlying health conditions. The likelihood of you dying from COVID is extremely small. It's minuscule. And Joe Rogan had COVID just now. And
the media is having a field day.
Yeah, no kidding. And so most people, I mean, if you're a normal, healthy young person, for a few days you feel like crap, just like getting the flu, and then you're fine. And so that's why a lot of people are awaking to that, realization, and that's why a lot of people are hesitant, and they will say, you know what, I'm willing to risk it, and it's my body, my choice. I'm going to get the COVID eventually, and I will suffer through it. My body will build up immunity, and now some of the studies coming out now, they're saying that
you should still take the vaccine.
Yeah, but you should.
I can't believe they added that into those pages.
I know, and so that's what the big hoo-ha is, and that's why all these people are protesting, and it's not because they are against people.
I mean, there are some loonies.
There are some loonies. There always are. But for the most part, I think people, and interestingly enough, you can the so-called anti-vaxxers, they're pretty calm, normal people, and it's usually people on the other side who are being quite belligerent and critical and judgmental of the people who are not getting the vaccine.
I'm concerned in BC, like they don't realize, they're going to incite violence eventually, even in Canada, where they get the quote majority against the minority, and there is going to be a violent confrontation. It's going to be solely on the government, completely. But so like the Dr. Ryan, what was his last name?
Dr. Ryan Cole.
Yeah. Now I remember seeing he's very, very good thing, but so he's a virologist. Now here's what I say. They say trust your doctors. It's like, okay, my GP doesn't know dick all about this stuff. Okay, I don't even trust my GP or most of the GPs I've seen in general, because they've given me wrong information or misdiagnosis. I've talked about this so much on my podcast, but how many virologists, immunologists in the world are there? Not a lot, I would imagine. Probably a handful, 100, 200 at an expert class. The doctors being trotted out publicly are very rarely them, because when you listen to the actual people who know what they're talking about on this topic, they'll say, hey, man, you shouldn't have closed the border, which that I disagree with a little bit, because you needed time to slow the spread just so the systems can be preserved, but they didn't even do that. Anyway, they said masks don't work. They said all this stuff. These people who were once, we support them, like Michael Osterholm, who's now being ostracized by the media because he said, why are you still wearing masks publicly? It's not going to do anything, particularly for the Delta variant. The actual experts are the ones being ignored, and they're trotting out like just GPs and like hacks or political individuals. Now, on how they classify what a COVID death is, that was always a question, and they've distracted people enough not to talk about that anymore. But their argument is, well, they wouldn't have come into the hospital if they didn't get COVID. It's like, okay, we're playing this game. Fact, more people die annually globally from obesity than from COVID. Now, do you say they die of obesity, or did you say they died of a heart attack? Because you usually say they died of a heart attack. Because if we want to play this game, we can say, okay, we have to now reclassify all heart attack deaths that were related to being obese as obese deaths. And you see how that now changes the view. The reality is the opposite is quite the true. With obesity, if you weren't obese, you wouldn't have half those medical problems. With the COVID thing, well, you can't fix age. There's nothing we can do about that. Well, the next group of people getting targeted, is obese people or unhealthy people or people with unfortunate diseases that there's nothing they can do about it. That's where we can be compassionate. But if you're obese, and we're saying they died of COVID, it's like, but they came into the hospital and are now worse in the hospital. And there's a lot of, that's why they stopped using the ventilators, because the ventilators, they still use them for extreme cases, but they were literally putting everyone on ventilators right away. And you find out the reason they were doing it was to protect the hospital staff, not the patients. And once they realized the ventilators were killing people at a higher rate. So a lot of the early deaths in North America were from medical intervention, not specifically from the other. They will never ever record those early deaths as medical intervention deaths. And in fact, people have commented in the last 2 years, they used to record in deaths, medical error deaths. They've taken them out of all the charts. They're no longer available. They still record them, but in the public data, they don't put that. And it's like, 200,000 people died last year in America of medical error? Because if people think that, then they don't trust the system. But here's the thing. Doctors are overworked. Even in the private system, they work too many hours. They work too long. They're tired. Outside of specific surgeries that require like a 14-hour surgery, this practice of working like lunatics in the medical health professional needs to stop. That's why they make mistakes. And that's where I will have compassion for the medical field is, yeah, you guys have been working your ass off. However, you being stressed out does not justify you demanding we shut down everything, because the issue is not me being able to operate my business or young people being able to walk around, because they were never really an issue, unless it's a young person living in a home with elderly people. Early on in the pandemic, that was legitimately something to be concerned about. But again, it's that misrepresentation of things, and then people believe. A lot of people I know They took the vaccine not because they felt it was the appropriate health thing for them, but because they made a decision that, well, it's the best thing for society, and I'm going to do my part. But really, when you dig deep, it's because they want to get back to normal, and they believe once again that this is the path to normalcy, which may be true this time, but based on the entire year and a half of bullshit, you do this, we'll go back to normal. No, do this, we'll go back to normal. And now you're bringing in some sort of social tracking system. And people are behind it because they believe it's going to make them safer. I don't see how. Say BC, for example. People believe that passport is going to stop the unvaccinated from going places. Like, hey, idiot, they can go to the shopping center. They can go to retail. They can go into the grocery store. They can go on transit with you. They can be all around you. Like the I See Dead people. They're everywhere. You're just stopping them from going to a few specific places that are the, quote, fun places, one of which is fitness, which is insane because you're saying these people, now you're taking away a mental health outlet, and you're preventing people who are probably healthy anyway from continuing to be healthy as some sort of torture. How is this going to stop anything? It's illogical. It makes no sense. But they've convinced people that it's the right thing to do, and this is how we're going to stop things. And people like you and me are like, wait a second, something's not right here. Here's why. And there's a lot more people than people realize. They're just quiet. Again, a lot of people I know think something is very wrong. They just don't like being political. They don't like being controversial. They're just doing it because I want to get back to normal. I'm tired of this already. Why can't you just do it too and get along with us and be a nice citizen? And then you come back to, yeah, doing your part as a good citizen is also how Hitler did what he did. It's also how the communists did what he did. It's also how they destroy the family unit. It's also how things destabilize. What the hell are you talking about, right? But we've been going on for a while. I think maybe bring it back to martial arts a little bit, and then we can wrap it up. So, do you have any?
Yeah, no, I loved your chain of thought, and yeah, I couldn't agree more. With our freedoms being stripped away, I think people, they need to ask more questions, being a little bit more engaged. You cannot function and live in a free society with these type of restrictions and creating this two-tier society. I think we are again at this at crossroads, and if we're not going to look at the big picture and start having meaningful conversations to break everything down, what's what, we are going to end up in a very dark place very soon. Again, coming from communism, I really don't want to end up living in some kind of authoritarian system ever again. I want to be able to speak my mind. I really hope that the conservatives will also look at some of the speech laws that they enacted a few years ago. I think Jordan Peterson was one of the first
ones
who
made him famous.
That's right. Who spoke up against the so-called hate speech laws. That's right. And now they are also coming after the guns of decent, good people. And a lot of people, they don't realize what the significance is of owning your own firearm. People, they are thinking that you don't need a firearm. You live in an advanced society. We are civilized. We have law enforcement. We have the military. If you need help, then you call the police and they will protect you, etc., etc. You don't need to go hunting because you can buy everything at the store. You don't need guns for self-defense because use your brain, etc., etc. The significance of owning your own firearm is the expression of one of the ultimate expressions of freedom, that you're a free person, and if there's a tyrannical government that's going to take over, and it's just a matter of time before
the
you will have that.
Taliban. That's one of the first things they're doing.
There you go. Yeah, just take good people's guns away, and as soon as Hitler and Stalin and Mao, they confiscated guns, with a big smile that, oh, don't worry, just give us your guns and we'll take good care of you. Millions, hundreds of millions of people died. I think the communism killed around 120 million.
During World War II.
Yeah, just during World War II. Not counting all the suffering and the misery and the famine and the hunger and all that during their tenure. And then, Hitler was a choir boy compared to Stalin and Mao and all the rest of them.
Which is a disturbing thing to say, but in practical numbers, it's true.
Exactly. And so I think for people to realize that there is one of the things that keeps governments in check, and it reminds them that in the United States too, that the Second and the First Amendment, they kind of go hand in hand, and there is a huge force that makes wannabe dictators, that keeps wannabe dictators in check. That they will think twice before they start implementing a full-out dictatorship. Look at Australia. They confiscated their guns a few years back, and right now they can walk all over people. They can do whatever they want. So I think we need to start fighting for our freedoms, in a peaceful way, and we need to start expressing ourselves, intelligently and coherently, so that our representatives and our politicians will hear us. We can always have disagreements, but conversations will need to start happening. And if our media is letting us down, then let's do something like this. Let's do podcasts. Let's invite more and more people to maybe roundtable conversations. I was very honored when you asked me to join you in this conversation. Again, this is my first podcast ever.
It's a lot of people for me.
And again, I had the jitters when we started, and I'm just an ordinary guy, the guy next door. I have no expertise in anything other than my life experience, and I see the world, as I am, and from my own experiences. Again, I always try to humble myself as much as possible, because there are so many smart people out there that are being underutilized nowadays. And again, my big shout out for all those great people who are standing up and taking the lead and being a shining beacon. You are now becoming one of those people, with your podcasts, and more power to you. And I wish you nothing but the very best, with your future podcasts and
I wish it didn't stop. People. Actually, I believe I was one of the first in Metro Vancouver in the martial arts community. Life happened and blah 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 blah, and I stopped for a few years, and then a few other people took off with theirs. I should have kept it up because I didn't really know what I wanted to do with it until COVID, and then I'm like, I need to. Well, first of all, I'm sitting here doing nothing. Well, I wasn't doing nothing, but I'm like, I have time right now because I can't go anywhere, can't do anything. So I'm like, oh, let's do that again. And it was because, like, you see the success of podcast. The reason why the mainstream despises podcasts is because there's no masters, and we can just put it on the internet. And they don't like that because they can't tell you what to do. They can't tell you what to say. Yeah, there's a lot of crackpots on podcasts now, but podcasts open my eyes to the world. I felt alone and isolated until I found podcasts, because unless you were at an Ivy League school with the best and the brightest, you didn't have access to intellectuals like Jordan Peterson or other people, which before the controversy, Jordan Peterson was a very well-respected Canadian psychiatrist who worked at various Ivy League schools, I think including Harvard, if I'm not mistaken, one of those. And he's actually was one of the most published psychiatrists in Canada. And I would have never have known about him if it wasn't for podcasts or the internet. That's when people say, I don't know where to get the information. I'm like, dude, podcasts, multiple sources of news from all over the world. You're not trying hard enough. They'll be like, where do you get it? I'm like, Facebook. They're like, huh? I'm like, do you know how the Facebook algorithm works? You click on what you like and it shows it to you. So every once in a while, if you want a different perspective, you click on something you normally don't click on, and all of a sudden, magically, your feed changes. It starts showing you new things. People have experimented. That's how it works. It's not that they are manipulating stuff, but you click on what you like, it'll show you what you like. So if you don't follow a diverse set of things, you will naturally, by the algorithmic nature, be given a echo chamber. So podcasting, which I found through the internet, I think I was just bored and looking at iTunes one day, actually, and I was like, what's a podcast? And actually, the Joe Rogan one was one I used to listen to it when it was like episode 50 onwards. He's like 1,000-something now. And at first, it's him screwing around, but then he started listening. He'd occasionally have someone intellectual on, and I'm like, huh. And then for me, it probably honestly stopped me from committing suicide, because now all of a sudden I don't feel alone. That there are other people out there that think like I think, and there are other people out there who have thought the things that I've thought that no one around me seems to be able to want to talk about or understand, whatever that means. But it allows the ideas, as you said, the conversations to flow unrestricted, which is what people in control don't like. So the importance of free speech and podcasting, despite what they think, I don't think they'll ever be able to shut it down, because if you know how to, you can probably find a server in some country that doesn't care, and you're protected, and you can keep putting it out there. So yeah, I agree. Obviously, I'm doing it. But thank you for coming on, and I think this was a very productive exchange of ideas and thoughts.
It was my pleasure.
Yeah.
You're listening to The Warrior's Day. Brought to you by Urban Tactics Krav Maga, turning lambs into lions.